sleeping stories.
The Complete Batman Lore, a Dark Knight Sip's journey through time vertical bar Loreforge, sleeping stories. Every city has a heartbeat, and some pulse with life and light, and the laughter of children playing in parks, where mothers watch with peaceful eyes. But Gotham beats differently because its heart is thunder wrapped in shadow, and its pulse is the echo of footsteps in alleys where even moonlight fears to tread. This is a city that devours hope, and it is a city built on bones and broken promises where the only law is the one you can afford to buy. And yet, once upon a time, there was a family who believed they could heal it, and they were called the Waynes. The Wayne name was not just a name, but a legacy carved into the very foundation of Gotham itself. And Thomas Wayne stood at the surgical table, with hands steady enough to hold a human heart, and gentle enough to restart it, because he believed in second chances, and in redemption, and in the idea that even a city drowning in its own darkness could be pulled back to the surface. His wife Martha was the kind of beautiful that had nothing to do with her face, and everything to do with the way she saw people, because she really saw them, and she saw the forgotten ones, and the broken ones, and the ones the city had already given up on. And she built shelters when others built walls. And she spoke of tomorrow when everyone else could only remember yesterday. Together they were Gotham's last true believers, and their son Bruce was 8 years old, with his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn hope. And he loved them the way children love their parents, which is completely and without question, and without knowing that love is something the universe can take away in the space between one heartbeat and the next. It was a Tuesday, and Tuesdays are supposed to be forgettable, and they are the kind of day that slips past without leaving a mark. But this Tuesday would be different because they had gone to the theater as a special treat, and the Mark of Zorro was playing on the big screen, and Bruce sat between his parents in the velvet seats, watching a masked hero fight for justice, with nothing but his wits and his will, and he did not know he was watching his future. When the movie ended, they left through the side exit, which was a shortcut Thomas had taken 100 times before, and it was called Crime Alley, and even the name should have been a warning. But Thomas Wayne did not believe in warnings, because he believed in statistics and probability, and the idea that fear was just a chemical reaction in the brain. But he was wrong. The man stepped from the shadows, like he had been waiting there since the beginning of time, and his hands shook, and his eyes were the eyes of someone who had already died inside, and was just waiting for his body to catch up. And he had a gun that gleamed dull silver under the broken streetlight, and it was a cheap thing, and the kind you buy in back rooms from men who do not ask questions. Thomas stepped forward because he was always the doctor, and always trying to save. And he raised his hands, not in surrender, but in that universal gesture that says, "Let us talk about this. Let us find another way." But the gun spoke first, and it was one shot, and it was clean, and it went through the heart. Thomas had spent his life learning to repair, and he fell, but not dramatically, and not like in movies, because he just stopped being upright and became something else, and became something that used to be a man. Martha screamed, and the sound tore through the alley like fabric ripping, and she moved toward her husband, because love does not have time to think about survival. But the gun spoke again, and she fell beside him. And now there were two bodies in expensive clothes, lying in a puddle that reflected the broken moon above. And Bruce stood frozen because his mind was trying to understand what his eyes were showing him. And the man with the gun looked at the boy, and for just a moment their eyes met, and the killer saw a child, and the child saw a monster. And then the man ran, and his footsteps echoed and faded, and then he was gone. Bruce knelt between his parents, and his small hands found his mother's pearls scattered across the ground like fallen stars. And he did not cry, because not yet. Because crying requires understanding, and his brain had not caught up to what his eyes had witnessed. And he just knelt there as a boy in the space between who he was and who he would become. The rain started, and of course it did, because this was Gotham, and blood mixed with water and red swirled into the cracks in the pavement, and it disappeared into the city that had seen this scene, played out 1,000 times before, and would see it 1,000 times again. But this time was different, because this time the city had killed the wrong people, and this time it had created something it could never uncreate. A police officer found him, and his name was Jim Gordon, and he was young then and still believing he could make a difference. And he wrapped his coat around the shaking boy and said something about everything being okay. But it was a lie, and it was the kind adults tell children when the truth is too sharp to hold. At the hospital, in the waiting room, Bruce sat on a plastic chair with his feet not quite touching the floor, and doctors and nurses moved past with their faces carefully blank, and it was the kind of blank that tells you everything without saying anything. Alfred Pennyworth arrived, and he was the family butler, though that word was too small for what he was, because he had been Thomas's friend and his confidant, and the man who had helped raise Bruce from the moment he could walk. And Alfred knelt in front of the boy, and his old soldier's knees protested. And he looked into those young eyes that had aged a lifetime in a single evening. He did not lie, and he did not say everything would be okay, and he simply opened his arms, and Bruce fell into them. And that is when the crying came, because there were great heaving sobs that felt like they might tear him apart from the inside. And he cried until there was nothing left, and until he was empty, and until he was just a hollow thing waiting to be filled with something or with anything. The funeral was 3 days later, and Wayne Manor filled with people who claimed to have loved Thomas and Martha, and they were people in black clothes saying words that meant nothing. And Bruce stood at the front watching them lower his parents into the earth and into the ground and into forever. He was numb. That night, after everyone had gone, and after the last fake condolence had been offered, and the last meaningless sympathy had been expressed, Bruce walked through the manor alone, and he walked past the photos of his smiling parents, and past the rooms that still smelled like his mother's perfume, and past the study where his father used to read late into the night. He found himself in the garden under the same broken moon that had watched his parents die, and he made a choice because it was not a wish, and it was not a hope, but it was a vow, and his voice was quiet, and it was just a whisper to the darkness. But sometimes the quietest words carry the most weight. He swore on the memory of his parents, and on the pearls still in his pocket, and on the blood still staining his memory, that what happened to him would never happen to anyone else, and that no child would ever stand where he stood, and that no family would ever break the way his had broken. He did not know how, and he did not have a plan, but he just knew that Bruce Wayne, the boy, had died in that alley alongside his parents, and something else had been born, and it was something without a name yet, and something without a shape, but something with a purpose. Alfred watched from the doorway in silence, because he had been a soldier once, and he knew the look in Bruce's eyes, and it was the look of someone who has decided to go to war, and he wanted to stop him, and to pull him back, and to tell him that revenge was a poison that would destroy him from the inside out. But he did not, because he also knew that some people are not meant to heal, and some people are meant to transform their pain into something else and into something the world needs, even if it does not know it yet. The days turned into weeks and weeks, into months, and Bruce stopped being a child in all the ways that mattered because he attended school, But his mind was elsewhere, and he was always planning, and he read everything he could about crime and about justice and about fear. The other children whispered about him because he was the orphan Wayne and the boy who watched his parents die, and they kept their distance as if tragedy was contagious, and as if getting too close might infect them with the same darkness that now lived behind his eyes. But Bruce did not care because he had stopped caring about what people thought the moment his parents' blood had mixed with Gotham rain. On his 14th birthday, Alfred found him in the cave beneath the manor, and it was the old cavern that Bruce had discovered years ago, and promptly forgotten until now. And Bruce stood in the center, surrounded by limestone and shadow, and looking up at the hole in the ceiling where light struggled to penetrate. And he said, "This place feels right, Alfred, and it feels like it was waiting for me." Alfred felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground cold, because he saw the future in that moment, and he saw what his boy was becoming and what he would have to become. And he made his own vow that if Bruce Wayne was going to walk into darkness, then Alfred Pennyworth would be the light he could follow home. The years that followed were strange ones because Bruce threw himself into his studies with an intensity that bordered on obsession, and he studied martial arts and criminology and chemistry and engineering and psychology and forensics, and he devoured knowledge like a man dying of thirst. But it was not enough because books could only teach so much, and Gotham could only show him so much. If he was going to become what he needed to become, and if he was going to transform into something that could strike fear into the hearts of those who preyed on the innocent, then he would have to leave, and he would have to disappear into the world and find teachers who could show him things no classroom ever would. On the night of his 18th birthday, Bruce stood in his father's study with Alfred beside him, and the old butler had aged in the decades since that terrible night, because there was more grey in his hair and more lines around his eyes, but his back was still straight and his resolve still firm. Alfred asked if he was really going to do this, and his voice was steady, but Bruce could hear the fear underneath. And Bruce said he had to, because Gotham was dying, and everyone who could have saved it was either corrupt or dead, and someone had to stand between the innocent and the monsters. Someone had to become the thing criminals fear. Alfred asked why it had to be him, and Bruce said, "Because I am already broken. Alfred and I broke 10 years ago in that alley, and now I am just choosing what to do with the pieces." Alfred wanted to argue and wanted to tell him there was another way and a better way, but he had known this boy for 18 years and had watched him grow from a laughing child into this determined young man with eyes older than his years. And he knew that once Bruce Wayne decided something, then nothing in this world could change his mind. Alfred asked how long he would be gone, and Bruce said as long as it takes, and maybe years. And Alfred asked what he would be when he came back. If he came back, and Bruce looked out the window at Gotham's skyline, and at the city that had taken everything from him, and he said, "I do not know yet, but I know what I will not be, and I will not be helpless, and I will not watch while others suffer, and I will not let this city win." He turned back to Alfred and said to keep the manor running and keep the company stable, and tell the board I am traveling and finding myself, because they will believe that since rich kids do it all the time. And Alfred asked what happens when he returns. And Bruce said, "When I return, I will be ready, and ready to give Gotham what it needs and what it deserves." They stood there in silence, and it was the old soldier and the young warrior, and both knowing that the boy leaving would not be the same person who came home. Bruce picked up the bag he had packed, and it was light because it had just the essentials and everything else he would acquire along the way. And Alfred walked him to the door, And at the threshold, Bruce stopped and turned and said, "Thank you, Alfred, for staying and for believing and for not trying to stop me." Alfred's voice was thick when he spoke, and he said, "I am not staying because I believe this is right, Master Bruce, and I am staying because when you lose your way in the darkness, someone needs to leave the light on to guide you home." Bruce nodded and then disappeared into the Gotham night, and Alfred watched until he could no longer see him, and then closed the door and walked to the study and poured himself a drink and began the long wait. He did not know then that it would be 7 years before he saw Bruce Wayne again, and 7 years of silence and of wondering and of fearing the knock on the door that would tell him his boy had died in some far corner of the world, but that knock never came. Instead, one night 7 years later, Alfred sat in that same study, reading by lamplight, and heard a sound, and they were footsteps that were familiar but different and heavier and more deliberate. And he looked up, and there in the doorway stood a man who was taller than he remembered and broader, scarred in places. But the eyes were the same. Bruce said, "Hello, Alfred," and his voice was deeper now and rougher, and it was the voice of someone who had seen things and done things and become things. And Alfred set down his book and stood slowly and said, "Master Bruce, you are home." Bruce stepped into the light and said, "I am home and I am ready." And Alfred saw it then, because the transformation was complete and the boy had left and a weapon had returned. And Alfred asked, "What happens now?" Bruce's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile, and he said, "Now Alfred, now Gotham learns to fear the night, because something is coming, and something born from tragedy and forged in pain, and something that will haunt the guilty and protect the innocent." He said, "I have traveled the world and learned from the best and the worst humanity has to offer, and I have become what I needed to become. But there is one thing left and one final piece." Bruce walked to the window and looked out at the city that had shaped him and said, "Criminals are a superstitious, cowardly lot. And my father said that once, and he was right, because they need to fear me, and not as a man, because men can be killed, and they need to fear a symbol, and something primal, and something that reaches into the oldest parts of their brain, and tells them to run." Alfred felt that chill again, and it was the same one he had felt in the cave all those years ago. And he asked what kind of symbol. Bruce turned and his eyes reflected the city lights. And in them, Alfred saw something that made him understand, because this was no longer just about justice. And this was about transformation and about taking the thing that had destroyed him and weaponizing it. Bruce said, "When I was a boy, I fell into a cave beneath the manor. And do you remember?" And Alfred nodded and said, "I remember pulling you out, and you were terrified and surrounded by bats." Bruce said, "I was, and I have been afraid of them ever since. But fear is a choice, Alfred, and tonight I choose to become what I fear most. Because if I fear it, then so will they." He moved toward the door and then paused and said, "Get some rest, Alfred, because tomorrow we begin, and tomorrow we build something Gotham has never seen, and a myth, and a legend, and a bat." And with that, he was gone, leaving Alfred alone in the study. And the old butler sat back down and picked up his drink and realized his hands were shaking, because it was not from fear, but from the certainty that the world was about to change, and that Gotham was about to meet its reckoning, and that the boy he had raised and the gentle child who had cried in his arms had become something else entirely, and something necessary, and something terrifying, and something that would either save the city or destroy itself. Trying outside, the wind picked up, and somewhere in the distance thunder rolled. And in the cave beneath Wayne Manor, in the darkness where light feared to go, something stirred, because it was not yet born, but close, and so close because the pieces were in place and the man was ready, and all that remained was the final transformation. and the moment when Bruce Wayne would die one last time, and from his ashes, the Batman would rise. The plane touched down in Tokyo at dawn, and Bruce Wayne stepped onto foreign soil with nothing but a backpack, and a list of names that were whispered in the shadows, and they were names of masters who taught things universities never would. And he had money enough to last a lifetime, but he left most of it behind, because the teachers he sought did not accept payment in dollars, and they accepted payment in blood and dedication and the willingness to break yourself down and rebuild from nothing. The first dojo was in a basement beneath a noodle shop in Shinjuku, and the master was 70 years old with hands like iron and eyes that could read your intentions before you knew them yourself. And Bruce stood at the entrance and bowed, and the master looked him up and down and said, "Rich boy." His voice was gravel and smoke, and he said, "You come here thinking money can buy skill." Bruce met his eyes and said, "I come here because I need to become more than I am." And the master studied him for a long moment and then nodded once and said, "We begin at dawn. And if you survive the first week, I will teach you. And if not, you will crawl home to whatever comfortable life you left behind." Bruce did not crawl home, and the training was unlike anything he had imagined, because there were hours of standing in one position until his legs screamed, and repeating the same movement 10,000 times until it became muscle memory, and fighting opponents he could not beat, and getting knocked down and getting up and getting knocked down again. The master never praised and never encouraged, and he simply pushed harder. And one morning after Bruce had been there 3 months, the master spoke during their dawn meditation, and he said, "You fight like you are angry." Bruce opened his eyes and said, "I am angry," and the master shook his head and said, "Anger is fire, and it burns hot and fast, and then it is gone, and you need something that burns forever." Bruce asked, "What burns forever?" And the master said, "Purpose." And he stood and walked to the window and said, "Anger will get you killed, but purpose will keep you alive." Bruce thought about his parents and about the vow he had made, and he said, "You are right." And the master said, "Then let go of the anger and transform it into something useful." Bruce spent another 6 months in that dojo learning not just how to fight, but how to think while fighting, and how to read an opponent, and how to turn their strength against them, and how to end a confrontation in seconds. When he finally left, the master gave him a single gift, and it was a small notebook filled with addresses of other teachers and other lessons. And the master said, "Go and learn and become." And Bruce bowed deeply and said, "Thank you." And the master waved him off and said, "Do not thank me yet, because the road ahead will break you many times, and whether you stay broken is up to you." From Tokyo, Bruce traveled to the mountains of Nepal, and there in a monastery perched on the edge of the world, he learned a different kind of fighting, and it was not of the body, but of the mind. And the monks woke before sunrise and meditated for hours in the freezing cold and practiced movements that looked like dance but were actually devastating martial techniques. The head monk was a man named Kirigi, and he spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight, and he watched Bruce during training and said, "Your body is strong, but your mind is chaos." Bruce wiped sweat from his face and said, "My mind is focused." And Kirigi asked on what, and Bruce said, "On becoming what I need to become." And Kirigi smiled sadly and said, "You are becoming a weapon. But a weapon without control is just as dangerous to its wielder as to the enemy." Bruce asked him to teach him control, and Kirigi gestured to the meditation hall and said, "Control begins with stillness, and stillness begins with breath, and breath begins with acceptance." Bruce asked acceptance of what, and Kirigi said of the past, "You cannot change." And Bruce felt anger flash through him, and said, I will never accept what happened. And Kirigi said, then you will never have peace. Bruce said, I do not want peace. I want justice. And Kirigi nodded slowly and said, justice and vengeance. Wear similar masks, and many men mistake one for the other. And Bruce said, I know the difference. And Kirigi asked, do you? And the question hung in the frozen air, and Bruce had no answer. The months in Nepal changed him in ways he did not expect, because the meditation taught him to quiet the rage that constantly churned inside, and not to eliminate it, but to control it, and to channel it, and the martial training pushed his body beyond limits he thought he had, and he learned to fight multiple opponents, and to use pressure points, and to end fights without killing, because killing was a line he had decided never to cross. One night, Kirigi found him standing at the edge of the cliff, watching the stars, and he said, you leave soon, and it was not a question, and Bruce nodded, and said, there is more to learn, and more teachers to find. Kirigi stood beside him, and said, you have learned much here, but I worry about what you will become with all this knowledge. And Bruce asked, what do you mean? And Kirigi said, knowledge is a tool, and it can build or destroy, and the choice is always with the one who wields it. Bruce said, I will use it to protect. And Kirigi was quiet for a moment, and then said, there is a man in the north, and he leads a group called the League of Shadows, and they also believe in justice, and Bruce should be careful of him. Bruce asked why, and Kirigi said, because his justice involves burning the diseased parts of the world to ash, and sometimes he cannot tell the difference between the disease and the cure. Bruce filed the warning away and said, thank you, Master Kirigi, for everything, and the monk placed a hand on his shoulder and said, remember, Bruce Wayne, that the darkest night comes just before the dawn, but only if you survive until morning. From Nepal, Bruce traveled through Southeast Asia, learning Muay Thai in Thailand and Eskrima in the Philippines and Silat in Indonesia, and each style added to his arsenal, and each teacher saw something different in him, and some saw dedication, and some saw obsession, and some saw a young man running from his past, while pretending to prepare for his future. In Malaysia, he met a thief who taught him how to disappear, and how to move through a room without being seen, and how to pick locks and disable alarms, and slip through shadows like smoke. The thief was a woman named Lynn, with scars on her hands and wisdom in her eyes, and she asked why he wanted to learn this. And Bruce chose his words carefully and said, because sometimes the front door is not an option. And she laughed and said, you are planning something big and something dangerous. Bruce said, maybe, and she studied him and said, you have the eyes of someone who has already died once and who is just walking around waiting to see what happens next. And Bruce asked, is that bad? And she said, depends on what you do with the time between deaths. She taught him for 3 months how to read a building's security, and how to find the weak points in any system, and how to become a ghost. And on his last day, she gave him a small set of lockpicks and said, you are going to do something that changes the world. And her voice was certain. And she said, just make sure it changes it for the better. Bruce said, I will try. And she said, trying is not enough. And you have to be certain, because once you start down this path, there is no going back. And Bruce said, I know. And she nodded and said, then go and become whatever it is you are becoming, and try not to lose yourself in the process. Europe was different because in Paris he learned from detectives, and in London from forensic experts, and in Berlin from engineers who showed him how to build things that did not exist in any manual. And he absorbed it all, and every piece of knowledge, and every skill, and every lesson, and he was building himself into something that did not yet have a name. But it was in the mountains between Pakistan and China. that he found the League of Shadows, or rather they found him because he was training alone in a remote village when they appeared. And there were 20 men in dark clothing, moving with a precision that spoke of military training. Their leader stepped forward, and he was a man with grey in his beard and eyes like frozen lakes. And he said, "Bruce Wayne," and his voice was calm and authoritative, and he said, "You have traveled far and learned much." Bruce stood slowly and asked, "Who are you?" And the man said, "My name is Ra's al Ghul, and I lead the League of Shadows, and we have been watching you." Bruce asked why, and Raz said, "Because men like you are rare, and men with resources and skill, and most importantly, purpose." And Bruce asked, "What do you know about my purpose?" Rose smiled and said, "You seek to bring justice to a corrupt world and to strike fear into the hearts of criminals and to become more than a man." And Bruce said nothing. Raz said, "We can help you because we have trained for centuries perfecting the art of justice." And he gestured to the mountains and said, "Come with us and learn what no other teacher can show you." Bruce asked, "What if I refuse?" And Regis said, "Then you will continue your journey alone and likely die before you achieve your goals. Because Gotham is a festering wound, Bruce Wayne, and it needs to be cauterized, not healed." Bruce thought about Kiriji's warning, but he also thought about everything he still needed to learn. And he said, "Show me," and Regis nodded and said, "Follow us." The League's fortress was hidden in a valley so remote it did not appear on any map. And there were ancient stone walls and training grounds carved into the mountainside, and an army of warriors who moved like shadows. Here Bruce learned things that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure, and he learned how to manipulate fear, and how to use theatricality as a weapon, and how to lead men into battle, and how to make impossible decisions. Ra's al Ghul was unlike any teacher he had encountered because he was brilliant and charismatic and absolutely certain of his righteousness. And they spent hours in discussion about philosophy and justice and the nature of evil. Rose stood at the window of his study looking out at the mountains and said, "The world is broken, Bruce, because institutions are corrupt and governments are bought and justice is a commodity sold to the highest bidder." Bruce listened and Raz asked, "What is the solution?" And he answered himself and said, "We burn it down. And all of it. Because when a body is infected beyond saving you, amputate. And when a city is corrupt beyond redemption, you destroy it. And build something new from the ashes." Bruce felt cold spread through his chest and said, "You are talking about mass murder." And Radha said, "I am talking about evolution, because Gotham is our next target and it has become a tumor spreading its corruption across the world and it must be excised." Bruce said no, because there are innocent people in Gotham and children and families and people who are just trying to survive. And Raz said collateral damage and necessary for the greater good. Bruce said that is not justice. And that is genocide, and Raoul studied him and said, "You have trained with us for a year, Bruce, and learned our ways and embraced our philosophy, but now you balk at the final lesson." Bruce asked, "What lesson?" And Rades said that true justice requires sacrifice, and that sometimes to save the world you must destroy parts of it. And Bruce shook his head and said, "I came here to learn how to protect people, not how to murder them." Reg sighed and said, "Then you have learned all you can from us, and tomorrow you will complete your final trial. And if you pass, you will join us as a full member. And if you refuse, you will leave." And Bruce asked, "What if I expose you?" And Reg said, "Then you will not leave at all." And the threat was clear. Bruce spent that night planning, and the final trial was held in the Great Hall, and all the League members gathered, and in the center of the room knelt a man who was bound and beaten and terrified. Brewer's voice echoed through the hall and said, "This man is a murderer, and he has killed 6 people, and the justice system let him go. On a technicality, and we brought him here so true justice could be served." And he gestured to Bruce and said, "Kill him and prove you understand what justice requires." Bruce looked at the man and saw the fear in his eyes, and it was the same fear he had seen in his own reflection for years, and he said no. The hall went silent, and Raz said this man deserves to die, and Bruce met his gaze and said, "Maybe, but not by my hand, because I will not be judge, jury, and executioner, and that is not justice, and that is vengeance, dressed up in noble language." Ria's expression hardened and said, "Then you fail, and you fail the League, and you fail your purpose, and you fail Gotham." And Bruce smiled coldly and said, "No, because I just choose a different path." He moved faster than anyone expected and grabbed a torch from the wall and threw it into the wooden supports, and the ancient building caught fire instantly and chaos erupted, and League members scrambled, and Bruce freed the prisoner and shoved him toward the exit and said, "Run." He fought his way through the burning fortress, not to kill but to escape, and Ra's al Ghul appeared through the smoke and said, "You are making a mistake." And Bruce said, "Maybe," and he blocked a strike and said, "But it is my mistake to make." They fought, and it was master and student and philosophy against philosophy, and the building collapsed around them, and Bruce escaped into the night. And behind him, the fortress burned, and the League scattered, and Ra's al Ghul disappeared into the mountains. But Bruce knew this was not over, because he had made an enemy, and a powerful one. And one day that enemy would come for him, but for now he ran down the mountain and through the valleys and back towards civilization. He had spent 7 years traveling the world and learning from masters and becoming something new, and now finally he was ready to go home and ready to face Gotham and ready to become the symbol he had dreamed of in that garden so many years ago. As he boarded the plane back to America, Bruce Wayne looked at his reflection in the window, and the boy who had left was gone. And in his place was a weapon and a guardian and a shadow, and someone capable of striking fear into the hearts of those who preyed on the innocent. Alfred was waiting at the airport, and he was older now but still standing straight and still loyal, and they embraced. And Alfred said, "Welcome home, Master Bruce." And Bruce pulled back and looked into the old man's eyes and said, "It is good to be home, Alfred. But Bruce Wayne is not who Gotham needs, because the city needs something else, and something that can work outside the law, and something criminals will fear." Alfred nodded slowly and said, "Then let us give them something to fear." And they drove back to Wayne Manor in silence. And the city passed by the windows, and it was dirty and corrupt and broken, but alive and still worth saving. That night, Bruce stood in the cave beneath the manor, and it was the same cave where he had made his decision all those years ago. And now it would become his base and his sanctuary and his war room. And he looked up at the bats circling in the darkness above, and he knew this was where it would all begin. Because not as Bruce Wayne and not as a man, but as something more and something eternal, and something that would haunt the guilty and protect the innocent. The Batman. The cave was vast and larger than Bruce had remembered from childhood, and limestone walls stretched into darkness, and the sound of water dripping echoed like a heartbeat, and somewhere above bats rustled and chittered, and their wings created whispers in the shadows, and this would be the foundation, and the place where Bruce Wayne ended, and something else began. Alfred stood at the entrance with architectural plans and engineering reports and said the structural integrity is sound and the water source is clean and there are 3 exits in case of emergency. But, Master Bruce, this will require significant construction and power and technology and equipment. Bruce walked deeper into the cave and his footsteps echoed and said, "Money is not an issue, Alfred. Because I need this place to be more than a hideout, and it needs to be a command center and a workshop, and a place where I can analyze and plan and prepare. Alfred asked if he was really going through with this, and his voice carried a mix of resignation and concern. And Bruce turned and said, "I traveled the world for 7 years and trained with the best fighters and the sharpest minds and the most dangerous men, and all of it led me here to this moment." He gestured to the cave and said criminals in Gotham operate in darkness and they think the shadows belong to them, and I am going to teach them they are wrong. Alfred set down the plans and asked, "What do you need?" And Bruce said, "Everything." Over the next 6 months, the cave transformed and construction crews worked in shifts, and each team was hired through shell companies, and none of them seeing the whole picture. And Alfred coordinated it all as a master of misdirection and compartmentalization. Computer systems were installed and servers with processing power that rivaled military installations and crime databases from around the world, and satellite feeds and police scanners and forensic equipment arrived in crates and microscopes and chemical analyzers and tools that could process evidence faster and more accurately than any police lab. A workshop took shape in one corner with metalworking equipment and advanced fabrication tools, and everything needed to build things that did not exist in any catalog. But the centerpiece and the thing Bruce obsessed over was the suit. He spent weeks sketching designs, and there were hundreds of variations, and each one trying to capture what he needed, which was fear and protection and mobility and symbolism. Bruce said to Alfred that it has to be more than armor because it has to be psychological warfare, and something that reaches into the primal part of the human brain, and something that makes criminals hesitate and makes them afraid. Alfred examined the sketches and said, "You mentioned bats before, and bats are creatures of fear for many people and associated with darkness and with the unknown." Bruce said, "Exactly, because when I was 8, I fell into this cave and the bats terrified me, and I have carried that fear my whole life, and so have most people, because it is instinctual and primal." Alfred said, "If it frightens you, then it will frighten them." And Bruce nodded and said, "If I can become that fear, and if I can turn myself into the thing that haunts their nightmares, then I become more than a man, and I become an idea." Alfred said quietly that ideas are bulletproof, but men are not. And Bruce said, "The suit will protect me, but the symbol will protect Gotham." The design evolved with a cape for dramatic effect, and to break up his silhouette, and a cowl to conceal identity and add to the bat imagery, and armor plating light enough for mobility, but strong enough to stop bullets, and everything in blacks and greys, which were colors that would blend with Gotham's eternal night. Bruce worked with materials scientists through untraceable channels and used Kevlar weave and Nomex and memory cloth and substances that could stop a knife or absorb impact. And he tested everything personally and had Alfred shoot him while wearing prototype armor, and threw himself off platforms to test the cape's glide capabilities. And every bruise and every broken bone and every failure taught him something and made the next version better. The cowl was the hardest part because it needed to be intimidating but also functional, and he went through 40 iterations, and each one feeling wrong because it was too much like a costume and not enough like a creature. One night, frustrated and exhausted, Bruce threw his latest attempt across the workshop, and it shattered against the wall, and Alfred appeared with tea and said, "Perhaps you are thinking about this wrong." Bruce rubbed his face and asked, "What do you mean?" And Alfred said, "You are trying to create something from nothing, but the image already exists in your mind and in your fear, so stop trying to build it and just manifest it." Bruce looked at the broken cowl, and then at the bats circling overhead and said, "You are right." And that night he closed his eyes and went back to that moment in childhood when he fell into darkness, and when wings surrounded him, and when fear was pure and absolute. He opened his eyes and began to sketch, and this time his hand moved with certainty, and the design that emerged was not human because it had sharp angles and pointed ears and empty white eyes, and something between man and demon, and something ancient, and something that belonged to nightmare. Bruce said, "This is it," and showed Alfred and said, "This is what criminals will see," and Alfred asked, "What will they think when they see it?" And Bruce smiled without humor and said, "They will think death has come for them." The rest of the equipment came together faster, and there was a grapple gun for vertical mobility that was tested and retested until it could hold twice his weight, and a utility belt with compartments for every tool he might need in the field, and smoke pellets, and lockpicks, and first aid, and batarangs. He crafted the batarangs himself and made them sharp and perfectly weighted and designed to disarm and disable, but not kill, because never kill, because that was the line he would not cross. The vehicles took longer, and Bruce started with motorcycles because they were fast and maneuverable and good for pursuit through Gotham's narrow streets. But he needed something more, and something that could take damage and break through obstacles and intimidate just by its presence. He began designing something that did not exist, and it was part tank and part sports car and all threat, and he called it the Batmobile. Alfred watched the designs evolve with growing concern and said, "Master Bruce, this is becoming an arms race before the race has even started." And Bruce said, "I am preparing for every possibility." And Alfred said, "You are preparing for war." Bruce looked up from his work and said, "Gotham has been at war for decades. Alfred and the criminals have been winning. And I am just bringing new weapons to the battlefield." And Alfred asked what happens when they escalate in response. And Bruce said, "Then I will escalate again." Alfred said, "This path leads to darkness." And Bruce said, "I know." And his voice was calm. And he said, "But I walked into darkness 7 years ago, and now I am just making it mine." As the equipment neared completion, Bruce began planning his debut, and he studied crime patterns and gang territories and police response times. And he memorized every street and every alley and every rooftop in Gotham. He identified targets and drug dealers and human traffickers and corrupt officials and men who operated with impunity because they knew the system would not stop them, and they did not know about him yet and did not know to be afraid. But that would change. One night, 3 months after his return, Bruce stood in the cave wearing the completed suit, and every piece was in place, and every system tested, and Alfred stood back looking at him with an expression that mixed pride and sorrow. Alfred said, "You look," and then paused and said, "Terrifying." And Bruce said, "Good," and his voice came out different through the cowl because it was deeper and more resonant, and the voice modulator was working perfectly. Alfred stepped closer and said, "Promise me something." And Bruce asked, "What?" And Alfred said that you will remember who you are, and that under all that. And he gestured at the suit. "You are still Bruce Wayne, and still human, and still the boy I raised." Bruce said, "I promise, Alfred," but he was not sure if he was lying because the suit felt right in a way nothing else ever had. And like he had been building toward this moment his entire life, and like everything before was just preparation. And now finally he was complete. Alfred asked if he was ready, and Bruce walked to the Batmobile and ran his hand along its armored surface and said no. And he looked back at Alfred and said, "But Gotham cannot wait for me to be ready because the city is bleeding and I am the only one who can stop it." He climbed into the vehicle and the engine roared to life, and Alfred watched from the cave entrance as the Batmobile rocketed into the tunnel leading up to the surface and into the city and into history. Alfred whispered a prayer he had not spoken since his days in the military, and it was a prayer for soldiers going into battle, because that is what Bruce Wayne had become, which was a soldier fighting a war that would never end. And all Alfred could do now was wait and hope that when Bruce came back, if he came back, there would still be something human left to save. Above, in Wayne Manor, the grandfather clock chimed midnight, and the sound echoed through empty halls, and in Gotham, the criminals went about their business, unaware that everything was about to change, and unaware that something was coming for them, and something born from tragedy, and forged in pain, and shaped by an iron will that would not break. The Batman was no longer a dream, and no longer a plan, because he was real, and Gotham would never be the same. The first night was chaos, because Bruce had studied and planned and prepared for every variable he could imagine. But nothing prepared him for the reality of Gotham after dark, because the city was alive with predators and there were drug deals on every corner, and women forced into cars by men with dead eyes and children running packages for gangs because they had no other choice. This was the Gotham the wealthy never saw, and the Gotham politicians pretended did not exist, and the Gotham Bruce Wayne had sworn to save, and he crouched on a rooftop in the Narrows, which was the worst part of the city, where even police cars traveled in pairs, and his suit blended with the shadows, and the cape caught the wind. From here he could see 3 separate crimes in progress. And he had to choose, because priority was always priority. And there was the woman being dragged into the alley, and she screamed, but no one came, because no one ever came in the Narrows. Bruce moved, and the grapple gun fired, and the line secured to the building across the street, and he swung down silent, and the mugger heard nothing until it was too late, because a shadow fell over him, and he looked up and saw something impossible, which was a creature and a demon and a bat. He opened his mouth to scream, but Bruce's fist silenced him, and it was one punch and clean, and the man dropped, and the woman stared with eyes wide and mouth open, and she asked who, and Bruce's voice came out as a growl through the modulator, and he said, "Go and call the police and stay in the light." She ran, and Bruce zip-tied the mugger and left him for the police, and then vanished back into the darkness, and 5 blocks away, 3 men were beating a store owner who would not pay protection money, and Bruce appeared among them like smoke. They did not understand what was happening, because one moment they were alone, and the next something was there moving too fast to track and hitting too hard to resist. And in 15 seconds, all 3 were unconscious. The store owner stood trembling, and he would later call him the Bat, because that is what witnesses would call him. And this thing that moved through the night, and that struck without warning, and that disappeared before you could get a clear look. Bruce moved from crime to crime, learning as he went, and the suit worked because it absorbed impacts, and the cape confused opponents and made him look larger than he was, and the fear was real because he could see it in their eyes. And that moment of confusion and of primal terror, when the human brain could not reconcile what it was seeing. But he was also learning his limits, because he was fast but not fast enough, and strong but not strong enough, and 1 man he could handle easily, and 3 was difficult, and 5 almost overwhelmed him, and he took hits, and the armor absorbed most of the impact, but not all. By 3 in the morning he was bruised and bleeding in places and exhausted but alive, and Gotham was different, because 16 criminals were left for the police, and 12 victims were saved. And it was not much compared to the ocean of crime that flooded this city, but it was a start. He returned to the cave as dawn broke, and Alfred was waiting, and the old butler's face went pale when he saw the blood, and he said, "Dear God," and Bruce removed the cowl, and said, "It is not as bad as it looks, and mostly theirs." Alfred helped him out of the suit, examining the damage, and said, "You have 3 cracked ribs and multiple contusions, and this gash needs stitches." And Bruce said, "I will be fine." And Alfred said, "You will be dead if you continue like this." Bruce met his eyes and said, "I know what I am doing." Alfred asked you because from where I stand, you look like a man trying to fight a war alone, and wars kill soldiers, Master Bruce, even the best ones. Bruce said nothing because he knew Alfred was right. But what choice did he have? Because Gotham would not save itself, and he spent the day healing and planning and analyzing what went wrong and what went right. The news covered it by evening with reports of a vigilante and witnesses describing a creature and something not human. And the police were baffled, and Gordon stood at a press conference looking tired and said, "We are investigating these reports. But I want to be clear that vigilantism is illegal. Anyone operating outside the law will be arrested." Bruce watched from the manor, and Gordon was one of the few honest cops in Gotham, and maybe the only one, and eventually they would need to work together, but not yet. Because first he needed to establish the myth and make criminals afraid to operate after dark. And only then could he reach out and build an alliance with the one man in the GCPD who might understand. That night he went out again with different territory and different criminals, but the same results. And by the end of the week, Gotham was buzzing with stories about the Bat and the Dark Knight and the Demon of Gotham, and a creature that hunted criminals and that came from nowhere, and that could not be killed or caught or even identified. Most people did not believe it because it was urban legend and mass hysteria. But the criminals believed because they felt it, and the fear and the uncertainty and that feeling of being watched when you walk the streets after dark, and that sense that the shadows were no longer empty. Gang meetings were held and bosses tried to make sense of what was happening. And some increased security and traveled in larger groups, and others dismissed it as rumors and coincidence. But they were wrong. Bruce targeted them systematically, and the drug dealers first by taking out their distribution networks and their safe houses and their muscle. And he learned their patterns and their hierarchies, and struck where they were weakest. He was not trying to arrest them all because that was impossible, and he was trying to make them afraid and make them understand that Gotham had changed and that someone was watching and that there would be consequences. The Falcone family controlled most of the drug trade, and Carmine Falcone was old school mob who thought he was untouchable and protected by corrupt cops and judges. He had bought decades ago, and Bruce studied him for 2 weeks and learned his routines and his security and his weaknesses. Then one night he struck, and Falcone was having dinner at his restaurant with 6 bodyguards and all armed and all trained. And Bruce came through the skylight and glass rained down and screams erupted, and he moved through them like a storm, and it was brutal and efficient and unstoppable. In 90 seconds, all 6 guards were down, and Falcone sat frozen at his table staring at this thing, standing in front of him, and he asked, "What are you?" And Bruce leaned close, and his voice was a growl from hell, and he said, "I am the reason the criminal element in Gotham will learn to fear the dark." Falcone said, "You do not scare me." And he tried to sound tough, but his hands shook, and he said, "I have dealt with worse than you?" And Bruce said no, and grabbed him by the throat and lifted him out of his chair and said, "You have not." Bruce said, "Tell your people and tell everyone that Gotham belongs to me now, and operate in daylight if you must. But when night falls, I am watching." And he dropped Falcone, and the old man collapsed, gasping, and by the time he looked up, the Bat was gone. The story spread like wildfire because Carmine Falcone, who was the most powerful criminal in Gotham, had been humiliated and beaten and left alive as a message. And Bruce watched the criminal underworld react, and some fled the city and others went to ground. And a few foolish ones tried to hunt him, but they learned quickly that hunting the Batman was suicide. But it was not just criminals who noticed, because the media began covering the story seriously, and debate shows argued about whether this vigilante was helping or hurting Gotham, and civil rights groups protested the violence and crime statistics showed a measurable drop in certain neighborhoods. And the police were divided because most wanted him caught and arrested and stopped. But a few and a very few wondered if maybe Gotham needed this and needed someone willing to do what they could not. Jim Gordon was one of those few, and he stood on a rooftop one night alone, and looking out over the city he had sworn to protect, and he had heard the stories and seen the evidence, and this bat was real and effective, but operating outside the law and creating as many problems as he solved. Gordon did not know what to think until the voice came from behind him, and it said Detective Gordon, and he spun with his hand, going to his gun, and the bat stood there motionless, and a shadow among shadows. Gordon's heart hammered, but he kept his voice steady and said, "You are the one everyone is talking about." And the voice said, "I am." And Gordon asked, "Why reveal yourself to me?" Bruce had studied Gordon for weeks and knew he was honest and knew he could be trusted. And he said, "Because Gotham needs more than fear, and it needs justice, and real justice, and you cannot provide that alone." Gordon said no, and Bruce stepped closer and said, "But I can help you, and help you build cases and gather evidence and reach places you cannot." Gordon studied this creature in front of him, and every instinct said to arrest him, and every law said this was wrong, but every case that had been handed to him in the past month was solid, and every criminal the bat had stopped deserved to be in jail. He made a decision and asked, "What do you want from me?" And Bruce said nothing yet, and pulled something from his belt, which was a device, and he said, "This will contact me when you need help, and when the system fails, and when the corruption runs too deep." He set it on the ledge between them, and Gordon looked at it and then at the bat, and asked, "What if I want to arrest you instead?" And Bruce said, "You could try," and there was no threat in the voice, just statement of fact. Gordon nodded slowly and asked, "What do I call you?" And Bruce said, "Batman." And the name hung in the air, and then Batman stepped back into shadow and into darkness and into nothing. Gordon blinked because he was alone on the rooftop with just him and the device, and he picked it up and turned it over in his hands and then pocketed it and smiled because maybe, just maybe, Gotham had a chance after all. The alliance was formed, and it was unspoken and unofficial but real. And Gordon would feed Batman information on cases that were being buried, and on criminals who had escaped justice through corruption. And Batman would investigate and gather evidence, and leave criminals tied up with proof of their crimes for Gordon to collect. It was not perfect, and it was not legal, but it worked. And as winter turned to spring, Bruce had been operating for 6 months, and the legend had solidified, and criminals feared the night, and the mob was in disarray, and Gotham's crime rate had dropped for the first time in 20 years. But Bruce knew this was just the beginning, because he had won the first battle and established himself and created the symbol. But Gotham's corruption ran deeper than street crime, and there were politicians to expose and corrupt judges to remove, and a whole system that needed dismantling. And somewhere out there in the chaos, he had created something else was stirring. And someone watching, and someone who saw the Batman not as a threat but as an opportunity. And someone who understood that where there is order, chaos always follows. But Bruce did not know that yet, because for now, he crouched on a gargoyle overlooking the city and his city. And the symbol he had become was working, and Gotham was changing, and not fast enough. Because it was never fast enough, but changing. He thought about his parents, and about the vow he made in the garden, and about the boy who died in Crime Alley, and he had kept his promise because no child would suffer what he suffered, and not while he drew breath, and not while the Batman watched over Gotham. Alfred's voice crackled in his ear, and asked, "How are you doing out there, Master Bruce?" And Bruce smiled behind the cowl and said, "I am home, Alfred, and this is where I belong." And Alfred said, "Please be careful," and Bruce said, "Always." Bruce stood and the cape caught the wind, and below a police scanner reported a robbery in progress. And he was moving before the report finished and dropping from the building and gliding through the night as a shadow with purpose and a symbol with teeth, and the Batman and Gotham would never be the same. The weeks turned into months, and the pattern continued because every night Bruce went out, and every night he found crime and stopped it and left criminals for Gordon, and the alliance between them grew stronger and more efficient. And Gordon would shine a light into the sky when he needed help, and a makeshift signal that became known as the Bat Signal. The media debated endlessly about whether the Batman was hero or menace, and the mayor called for his arrest, while secretly grateful that crime was dropping, and the wealthy praised him at dinner parties, while clutching their pearls and worrying he might come for their white-collar crimes next. Bruce attended those parties as Bruce Wayne and played the role of bored billionaire playboy and made jokes about the Batman and speculated wildly about who he might be, and no one suspected that the man sipping champagne and flirting with models was the same creature that terrorized criminals at night. The duality became second nature because during the day he was Bruce Wayne and frivolous and useless, and at night he was Batman and purposeful and unstoppable. And the line between them blurred more each day, and Alfred worried that eventually there would be no Bruce left at all, and only the Bat. One night, 6 months into his crusade, Bruce stopped a human trafficking operation and freed 20 women who had been smuggled into Gotham and promised lives that turned into nightmare, and he called Gordon and waited until the detective arrived with backup. Gordon looked at the unconscious traffickers and then at Batman and said, "You are making a real difference, and you know that, right?" And Bruce said, "Not enough and not fast enough." And Gordon said, "Rome was not built in a day, and Gotham will not be saved in one either." Bruce asked, "How much of the Force can we trust?" And Gordon's face darkened, and he said, "Honestly, maybe 20%. And the rest are either corrupt or too scared to act." And Bruce said, "Then we keep building cases, and eventually they will have to act or be exposed themselves." Gordon nodded and said, "I got something for you," and pulled out a file and said, "This is about someone called the Joker, and he has been hitting chemical plants and comedy clubs, and we cannot figure out what he wants." And Batman said, "Tell me everything." Gordon said he appeared 3 weeks ago, and no one knows where he came from, and he kills for no reason, and leaves calling cards, and witness descriptions are inconsistent. And some say he has green hair and white skin and a permanent smile, and others say he is just a man in makeup. Bruce felt something cold in his stomach because this was different, and this was not about money or power or territory, and this was chaos for its own sake. And he said, "I will look into it." And Gordon said, "Be careful with this one, and something about him is wrong." Bruce returned to the cave and spent the next week researching, and every crime scene photo, and every witness statement, and every clue, and the pattern made no sense because there was no pattern, and the Joker killed drug dealers and innocents alike, and stole money, then burned it, and left riddles that had no answers. Alfred brought him food, and found him staring at the computer screens, and said, "You need to sleep." Master Bruce, and Bruce said, "I need to understand him." And Alfred said, "Perhaps he cannot be understood, and perhaps that is the point." Bruce turned and said, "Everyone can be understood, and everyone has a motive and a history and a reason." And Alfred said, "And what if his reason is that he has no reason? And what if he is simply mad?" And Bruce said, "Then I will stop him anyway." 2 nights later, the Joker struck again and hit a mob bank and killed 5 gangsters and left the money and spray painted a message on the wall that said, "Why so serious?" And Bruce arrived too late and found only bodies and laughter echoing in his mind. He studied the scene, And the Joker's methods were crude but effective, and he fought like someone who did not care if he lived or died. And that made him unpredictable and dangerous. And Bruce realized this was the opposite of what he represented, because Batman was control and discipline and purpose, and the Joker was chaos incarnate. Their first meeting happened on a rooftop 3 weeks later, because Bruce had tracked the Joker to an abandoned amusement park where he was holding hostages, and Bruce arrived to find the Joker standing on the edge of a building with a hostage dangling over the side. The Joker wore a purple suit, and his face was painted white with a red smile that stretched too wide, and his eyes were pools of madness and glee. And he said, "Well, well, well, and look what crawled out of the cave, and the Batman himself, and I am honored." Bruce said, "Let her go," and the Joker laughed, and it was a sound like breaking glass. And he said, "Or what? And you will stop me. And, oh, but that is the game, is it not? And you stop and I start, and round we go." And Bruce moved forward slowly and said, "This is your only warning." The Joker said, "But I do not want a warning, and I want to play." And he pulled the hostage back to safety, and Bruce tensed, and the Joker said, "Relax, Batsy. And where is the fun in dropping her when you are not close enough to fail to save her?" And he shoved her away, and she ran. Bruce asked, "What do you want?" And the Joker spread his arms wide and said, "Want." And oh, what a boring question. And everyone wants something, and money and power and love and revenge, but me and I just want to see what happens when you push things and really push them. Bruce said, "You are insane," and the Joker said, "Insane and labels. Labels, and maybe I am just honest, and maybe I see the joke." And he stepped closer and said, "You know what is funny, Batsy, and you and me, and we are not so different." Bruce said, "We are nothing alike." And the Joker said, "Oh, but we are. And both of us are one bad day away from being the other. And both of us are freaks and dressed up and playing pretend. And you pretend to be a hero, and I pretend to be a villain. But really, we are just two sides of the same coin." Bruce said, "I am nothing like you because I protect people." And the Joker laughed again and said, "Protect, and oh, that is rich, and you beat them half to death, and you terrify them, and you operate outside the law. And the only difference between us is that I am honest about what I am." Bruce felt anger rise and said, "I do not kill." And the Joker said, "Yet, and you do not kill yet. But every punch and every night, and you get a little closer and a little more willing. And that is what makes you interesting." And he pointed at Bruce and said, "You are trying so hard not to become me." Bruce said, "This ends now," and moved. But the Joker was faster than he looked and pulled a knife, and they fought on the rooftop. And it was brutal and chaotic. And the Joker fought like a rabid animal and laughing the entire time. Bruce landed a solid hit, and the Joker went down, and Bruce stood over him, and the Joker looked up, still smiling, and said, "Go ahead and do it, and kill me, and prove me right, and prove that under all that armor, you are just as crazy as I am." Bruce's fist hovered, and every instinct screamed to end this, and to stop the Joker permanently, and to cross the line just this once, because this man would kill again and again, and would never stop. But he did not, and he pulled back, and zip-tied the Joker, and left him for Gordon, and walked away, and behind him, the Joker's laughter echoed, and he shouted, "You will see, Batsy. And you will see that I am right. And one day you will thank me for showing you the truth." Bruce returned to the cave, shaking, and not from exertion, but from how close he had come, and how much he had wanted to cross that line. And Alfred found him, sitting in the dark, and asked if he was all right. Bruce said he tried to make me kill him, and Alfred said, "But you did not." And Bruce said, I wanted to, and that is what scares me. And Alfred sat beside him and said, the fact that you are scared means you are still human. And the day you stop being scared is the day you become what you fight. Bruce nodded, but said the Joker will escape, and he will kill again. And by not killing him, am I responsible for those deaths? And Alfred said, no, because you are not responsible for the evil that men do, and you are only responsible for staying true to who you are. Bruce said sometimes, I do not know who I am anymore. And Alfred said, you are Bruce Wayne, and you are my boy, and you are the man your parents would be proud of, and never forget that. The Joker was sent to Arkham Asylum, and a facility for the criminally insane, and Bruce knew it would not hold him, because Arkham never held anyone for long, and the system was too broken and too corrupt, and within a month, the Joker escaped, and the game began again. But Bruce was ready, and each time the Joker struck, Bruce was there, and they fought, and the Joker was caught and sent back to Arkham, and escaped again. And the cycle continued and became a twisted dance between order and chaos. The media called it a rivalry, and criminologists studied it, and psychiatrists debated the psychology, but Bruce knew the truth, which was that the Joker had been right about one thing, and they were connected now and bound together in a way that neither could escape. Because Batman needed the Joker to prove that even in the face of pure chaos, there could be justice, and the Joker needed Batman to prove that even the most disciplined hero could be pushed to the edge. It was a game neither could win, and neither could walk away from. And as the first year drew to a close, Bruce stood on a rooftop looking out at Gotham and thought about how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. The streets were safer but not safe, and the criminals were afraid but not defeated, and the city was healing, but the wounds ran deep and would take years to fully close if they ever did. Alfred asked over the radio if he was coming home, and Bruce said soon and just a few more hours, and Alfred sighed and said, you said that 6 hours ago, and Bruce smiled and said, I know, but Gotham needs me. And that was the truth, because Gotham did need him, and would always need him. And Bruce had accepted that this was not a mission with an end date, and this was a war that would last his entire life, and perhaps beyond. Because he was not just a man anymore, and he was a symbol, and symbols do not retire, and symbols do not rest, and symbols endure as long as they are needed. The bat signal lit up the sky, and Bruce moved toward it, and gliding through the night, and ready for whatever came next. Because this was year one, and the beginning of a legend that would echo through time. And somewhere in Arkham Asylum, the Joker sat in his cell, and looked out the window at the bat signal and smiled, because the game was just beginning, and oh, what fun they would have. Gotham had its Dark Knight, and its Clown Prince of Crime, and the stage was set for a conflict that would define a generation and test the limits of heroism and madness and everything in between. But for now, Bruce was content because the city was safer than it had been in decades, and criminals feared the night, and somewhere a child was walking home without being afraid, and that made it all worth it. This was what he had trained for, and what he had become, and what he would remain until his last breath. Because he was the Batman, and Gotham was his city, and he would protect it, no matter the cost. The night was young, and there was work to be done, and Bruce Wayne disappeared into the shadows, leaving only the legend behind, and the legend of a creature that watched over Gotham, and struck fear into the hearts of evil, and gave hope to the innocent. And that legend would grow with each passing year until it became something more than one man could ever be. And it became an idea that could never die, as long as there was someone willing to wear the cowl and carry the burden. But that was a story for another night. And for now, there was only the present and the endless patrol and the eternal vigilance that defined the Batman. Year one was complete, and the foundation was laid, and everything that would come after would build upon this moment, and this choice, and this symbol. Gotham had its guardian, and its myth, and its dark knight, and the city would never be the same. Year 2 brought new challenges and a new understanding, because Bruce realized that Gotham's criminals were evolving and adapting to his presence, and they were no longer just thugs and gangsters, but something more and something darker. The first to emerge after the Joker was a man who called himself the Riddler, and he left puzzles at crime scenes and clues that taunted the police, and challenged Batman to catch him before the next victim died. Bruce found the first riddle spray painted on a bank wall after a robbery, and it read, "What has a head and a tail, but no body?" And the answer was simple, which was a coin, but the meaning was deeper, because the next target would be the Gotham Mint. He arrived in time to stop the theft, but the Riddler escaped and left another puzzle and another challenge. And Bruce realized this was not about money, but about proving intellectual superiority and showing the world that he was smarter than the great detective. They played this game for months, and each crime more elaborate than the last, and each riddle more complex, and Bruce studied the patterns and learned that the Riddler was Edward Nygma, and a former Wayne Enterprises employee who had been fired for stealing and who had developed an obsessive need to prove his genius. The final confrontation happened in an abandoned factory, because of course it did, and the Riddler had Batman trapped in a maze of deadly puzzles, and each one designed to kill if answered wrong. Bruce worked through them methodically, and his training and his mind sharp enough to see through the deceptions. And when he finally reached the Riddler, the man was shaking with anticipation and asked, "Do you see now, and do you understand that I am your intellectual equal?" Bruce said no. "And you are a narcissist who needs validation and who cannot accept that intelligence without purpose is just noise." The Riddler's face twisted with rage, and he attacked, and Bruce subdued him easily, because for all his intellect, the Riddler had never trained his body. As Gordon took him away, the Riddler shouted that he would return, and that next time the riddles would be impossible, and Bruce knew he was right, because Arkham would not hold him, and the cycle would continue. But what troubled Bruce was not the Riddler himself, but what he represented, because this was a man who could have done great things and could have used his genius to help people, but instead had twisted it into obsession and into a need to prove something that ultimately meant nothing. Alfred said that night that the Riddler chose his path, and Bruce said, "I know, but I wonder if things had been different, and if someone had seen his potential and helped him, and would he still have become this?" And Alfred said, "Perhaps, but you cannot save everyone, Master Bruce, and some people are determined to destroy themselves." The next to appear was Scarecrow, and a former psychiatrist named Jonathan Crane, who had been experimenting with fear toxins and using his patients as test subjects until he was discovered and fired and driven underground. His first attack happened at Gotham University, where he released his fear gas during a crowded lecture, and students ran screaming from hallucinations and visions of their worst nightmares, and 3 people died from heart attacks brought on by pure terror. Bruce investigated and found that Crane had a childhood marked by abuse and by a father who had locked him in a church with crows as punishment, and fear had been his constant companion until he decided to become its master. When they finally met, Scarecrow was wearing his signature burlap mask and surrounded by his fear gas, and he said, "You understand, do you not, Batman? And you use fear as a weapon, just as I do, and we are kindred spirits." Bruce said, "We are nothing alike, because I use fear to protect, and you use it to harm." And Scarecrow laughed and said, "Such distinctions and such moral posturing. But tell me, Batman, what do you fear?" And he released the gas. Bruce's mask had filters, but some got through, and he saw his parents dying again and again in an endless loop, and saw himself becoming the thing he hated, and saw Gotham burning while he stood powerless, and he fell to his knees. But his training kicked in, and the meditation from Nepal, and the mental discipline, and he fought through the hallucinations, and stood and removed his mask, and breathed the gas fully, and let it wash over him while maintaining control. Scarecrow backed away in fear because he had never seen anyone resist the toxin through will alone. And Bruce said, "Fear is a tool, but you let it control you, and you became its slave instead of its master, and that is why you will always lose." He captured Scarecrow and sent him to Arkham, but the encounter left him shaken, because for a moment he had seen the truth in the hallucinations, and he was one bad day away from becoming what he fought, and the line was thinner than he wanted to admit. Harvey Dent was different because Harvey was a friend, and the new district attorney who was actually trying to clean up Gotham and working with Gordon and Batman to take down the mob families. Bruce liked Harvey because he was idealistic and passionate and believed in the system even when the system failed him, and they worked together for months building cases and putting corrupt officials behind bars and making real progress. Harvey had a girlfriend named Rachel who Bruce had known since childhood, and there was history there and feelings that had never been fully explored because Bruce had left and become something else. And now it was too late. One night, Bruce and Harvey met on a rooftop, and Harvey said, "You know, I envy you." And Bruce asked why, and Harvey said, "Because you do not have to play by the rules, and you can do what needs to be done without worrying about judges and juries and appeals." Bruce said the rules are what separate us from them, and without them we are just another brand of criminal. And Harvey said, "I know, but sometimes I wish I could just skip the trial and deliver justice directly." Bruce felt a chill because he recognized the sentiment and recognized the dangerous thinking and said that path leads to darkness. Harvey, and trust me, I know. And Harvey laughed and said, "Do not worry, Bruce, and I am one of the good guys." But fate had other plans because during a trial of mob boss Sal Maroni, the gangster threw acid at Harvey, and the left side of his face was burned beyond recognition, and Harvey screamed and fell, and the courtroom erupted in chaos. Bruce visited him in the hospital, and Harvey was bandaged and sedated, and the doctor said he would survive, but the scarring would be permanent and psychological evaluation would be needed. When Harvey woke days later, he was different because the pain had changed him and the duality of his appearance had cracked something inside, and he stared at Bruce with one good eye and one ruined and said, "The system failed me, and it let Maroni have that acid, and it let him get close enough to throw it." Bruce said, "We will get him, and we will make this right." And Harvey said, "Right, and what is right, and is it right that I followed the rules and got this?" And he gestured at his face, "And is it right that monsters walk free while good men suffer?" Bruce tried to reason with him, but Harvey discharged himself that night and disappeared, and 2 weeks later, bodies started appearing, and all of them criminals who had escaped justice through technicalities and corruption, and each one killed with a coin flip. Heads they lived and tails they died, and Harvey had become Two-Face and a creature of pure chance and duality, and the man who believed in the system had become its greatest critic. Bruce hunted him for months, and each encounter more heartbreaking than the last, because this was his friend and someone he had trusted and someone the city had needed, and now he was just another criminal. Their final confrontation happened in the same courtroom where Harvey had been scarred, and Two-Face held Rachel hostage and his coin ready to decide her fate. Bruce said, "Harvey, please, and you are better than this," and Two-Face said, "Harvey, and Harvey is dead. And there is only chance now and only chaos," and he flipped the coin. Bruce moved as it spun in the air and tackled Two-Face, and the coin fell and landed on heads, and Rachel lived, and Two-Face was sent to Arkham screaming about the unfairness of fate. But Bruce knew this was his failure because he had seen the warning signs and had ignored them, and had believed Harvey was strong enough to resist the darkness, and he had been wrong. Alfred found him that night, sitting in the cave, staring at Harvey's file, and said, "You could not have known." And Bruce said, "I should have known, and I should have helped him before it was too late. And now, another good man is lost." Alfred said, "Some people cannot be saved, Master Bruce, and no matter how much you want to, and no matter how hard you try, and some people are determined to fall, and all you can do is be there to catch the ones who want to be caught." The pattern continued with more rogues emerging, and each one a twisted reflection of some aspect of Batman or of Bruce Wayne or of the city itself. Poison Ivy appeared, and a woman named Pamela Esley, who had been experimented on by her employer and transformed into something part human, part plant, and she declared war on those who harmed the environment and killed corporate executives with poisonous kisses. Bruce sympathized with her cause, but not her methods. And when they fought, she tried to seduce him with her pheromones and her powers, and said, "We could rule this city together and make it green again and make it pure." But Bruce's cowl filtered the toxins, and he said killing will not save the planet, and it will just make you a murderer with good intentions. And she said, spoken like someone who has never lost everything. And Bruce said, "I have lost everything, and that is why I know vengeance is not the answer." He stopped her but felt the weight of her words, because she was right that Gotham poisoned itself, and that corporations destroyed without consequence, and that the system protected the powerful while the planet died. Then came Mr. Freeze, and a scientist named Victor Freeze, who had frozen himself and his dying wife in cryogenic stasis, while he searched for a cure for her illness. And when his funding was cut and his lab destroyed, he became a villain, not out of greed, but out of love. Bruce found him robbing medical facilities for equipment and supplies, and when they fought, Freeze said, "All I want is to save her, and all I need is time, and why do you stop me when all I do is love?" Bruce said, "Because you are hurting people, and because your love does not give you the right to harm others." And Freeze said, "Easy for you to say, and you who have never loved and never known what it means to lose everything." Bruce said, "I have lost everything, and I know exactly what it means, and that is why I cannot let you continue. Because if we all acted on our pain, the world would burn." He defeated Freeze and arranged for Wayne Enterprises to fund the research for his wife's cure, and sent Freeze to Arkham with a promise that Nora would be cared for, and Freeze looked at him with tears frozen on his face, and said, "Perhaps you do understand after all." Each villain taught Bruce something about himself, and about the choices he had made, and about the paths he could have taken, because the Riddler showed what happens when genius becomes obsession, and Scarecrow showed what happens when fear controls you instead of you controlling it. And Two-Face showed that even the best people can fall if pushed hard enough. And Ivy and Freeze showed that good intentions could lead to terrible actions. Bruce realized he was looking at versions of himself and at what he could have become if circumstances had been different, and if he had made different choices, and if he had let his pain consume him instead of transforming it. Alfred said one night that every villain is a cautionary tale, and Bruce nodded and said they are reflections and distorted mirrors, showing me what I could be and what I must never become. The weight of it all pressed down on him, and the endless cycle of catching them and them escaping and catching them again, and each time learning new depths to their madness and new reasons for their actions. He began to understand that Gotham created its own monsters and that the city's corruption and pain and suffering twisted people into these creatures, and that by saving Gotham, he was trying to stop the creation of new villains as much as stop the existing ones. But it was exhausting, and the toll on his body and his mind and his soul grew with each passing month. And he was faster now, and stronger and more skilled, but also more tired and more isolated and more consumed by the mission. He attended parties as Bruce Wayne and smiled and laughed and played the fool, while inside he calculated how many crimes were happening while he wasted time and how many people were suffering while he pretended to be useless. The duality that had seemed so clear in the beginning now blurred and bled together. And sometimes he forgot which mask was real and which was the disguise, and whether Bruce Wayne was pretending to be Batman or Batman was pretending to be Bruce Wayne. Alfred worried constantly and saw the toll it was taking and saw his boy disappearing into the cowl and tried to pull him back. But Bruce was too far gone and too committed and too certain that he could not stop. One night, after a particularly brutal fight with Killer Croc and a man mutated into a reptilian monster, and Bruce returned to the cave, barely conscious, and Alfred stitched him up and said, "This will kill you, and you know that, right?" Bruce said then, "I died doing what matters." And Alfred said, "What about what matters to me? And what about the fact that I have already lost your parents, and I cannot lose you too?" Bruce looked at him and saw the old man's fear and his love and his desperation and said, "I am sorry, Alfred, and I know this is hard, but I cannot stop and Gotham needs me." Alfred said, "Gotham needs Bruce Wayne too, and needs the man, not just the symbol, and needs someone who can inspire hope during the day, not just fear at night." And Bruce said, "I will try," and but they both knew it was a lie. The Rogues Gallery grew, and Clayface, and a shape-shifting actor, and Mad Hatter, and a mind controller obsessed with Alice in Wonderland, and ventriloquist, and a man with a puppet that controlled him, and each one stranger and more dangerous than the last. Bruce documented them all and studied their patterns and their psychologies and their weaknesses and built files on each one and prepared contingencies for when they inevitably escaped Arkham and came back. Because they always came back. And Arkham was a revolving door, and the system was too broken to hold them, and the courts too corrupt to keep them locked up. And so Batman was all that stood between them and the innocent people of Gotham. He became a legend in those years, and parents told their children about the Batman to make them behave, and criminals whispered his name in fear, and the city itself seemed to breathe easier knowing he was watching. But the cost was everything, and every relationship, and every moment of peace, and every chance at normalcy. And Bruce Wayne, the billionaire, was a hollow shell, and Bruce Wayne, the man, barely existed, and there was only Batman. And Batman was eternal, and Batman was necessary, and Batman would never stop, because Gotham would never be truly saved, and the mission would never be complete, and there would always be one more criminal, and one more victim, and one more night of patrol. This was year 2 and year 3, and the years that followed, and time became meaningless and measured only in the distance between one fight and the next, and one villain and the next, and one life saved and the next one lost. Bruce stood on a rooftop one night and looked at his reflection in a puddle and saw only the cowl and only the bat and only the symbol, and he wondered if Bruce Wayne had died in that alley after all, and if everything since had just been the fever dream of a broken child who could not accept reality. But then the bat signal lit up, and there was no time for philosophy and no time for doubt, and only time for action. And he moved toward it because this was who he was, and this was what he had become, and there was no going back. The rogues were reflections, but they were also warnings, and each one showed him a future where he lost control, and lost himself, and lost everything that made him human, and he fought them as much to prove he was different as to stop their crimes. Because deep down Bruce feared he was no different, and that he was just as broken and just as twisted and just as lost, and the only thing separating him from them was the choice he made every night to not cross the line. And that choice was becoming harder with each passing year, and with each villain who escaped and killed again, and with each innocent life lost because he had been too slow or too merciful or too bound by his code. But he would not break, and he would not kill, and he would not become what he fought, and even if it cost him everything, and even if it cost him his life, and that was the promise he had made, and the line he would not cross. The Rogues Gallery was complete, and the city had its collection of monsters, and its dark mirror, and its twisted reflection of everything wrong with Gotham, and Batman stood against them all, because that was his purpose, and his burden, and his eternal punishment. And somewhere in Arkham the inmates watched and waited and planned their next escape, and their next crime, and their next confrontation with the Bat, because they too were trapped in the cycle, and they too could not escape, and they too were bound to this dance of madness and justice until the very end. This was the Gallery of Pain, and the reflection of the soul, and the price of being a symbol. And Bruce paid it willingly, because the alternative was unthinkable, and because Gotham needed him, and because he had made a promise in a garden long ago that he would never let another family break the way his had broken. And he would keep that promise no matter what it cost him, and no matter what he became, and no matter how many reflections of himself he had to face in the eyes of the monsters he fought. Because he was Batman, and that was all that mattered. She appeared on a rooftop on a Tuesday, and Bruce did not hear her coming, which was the first surprise, because no one snuck up on Batman, and no one moved through the shadows better than he did until now. He was tracking a diamond thief who had hit 3 high-end stores in a week, and the trail led here to the museum district, and he crouched on a gargoyle scanning the streets below, when a voice behind him said looking for someone. Bruce spun, and she stood there in a black suit that seemed to absorb light, and a cat-eared cowl and green eyes that sparkled with amusement behind her mask, and she held a bag that clinked with the sound of jewels. He said you and moved toward her, but she was already gone and leaping across rooftops with a grace that matched his own, and he pursued. And the chase took them across half of Gotham. She was fast and she was skilled, and she knew the city as well as he did. And every time he got close, she slipped away with a laugh that echoed in the night. And finally, she stopped on the edge of Wayne Tower, of all places, and waited. Bruce landed and said nowhere left to run, and she smiled and said, "Who says I am running? And maybe I just wanted to see if the great Batman could keep up." And he said, "Give back what you stole." She pulled a diamond from her bag and held it up to catch the moonlight, and said, "This and this is not stealing. And this is liberation, because these rocks sat in cases being admired by people who would never understand their beauty and never appreciate what they really are." Bruce said they belong to their owners, and she laughed and said, "Owners, and such a human concept. And you cannot own beauty, and you cannot cage what should be free. And besides, the insurance will cover it, and the rich will buy new ones, and everyone is happy." He said, "Accept the law," and she said, "The law, and oh, you want to talk about the law, and you who operates outside it, and you who beats people in alleys, and you who decides what justice means." And she stepped closer and said, "We are not so different, you and I." Bruce said, "We are completely different, because I do not steal, and she said no, and you just take what you want in other ways, and you take freedom, and you take choice, and you take the night itself, and claim it as yours. He moved to grab her, but she was faster, and she pressed against him and her hand on his chest, and said, "Tell me, Batman, and under all that armor, and are you even human anymore? And do you remember what it feels like to want something just because it is beautiful?" Bruce froze because her touch was electric, and because she was close enough that he could smell her perfume, and because something in him that had been dormant for years suddenly woke up. She said, "I thought so," and stepped back and dropped the diamond at his feet and said, "Keep it and return it if you want, and earn your gold star for the day." And she ran and leaped off the building and grappled away into the night. Bruce stood there for a long moment, holding the diamond and wondering what had just happened and who she was and why his heart was racing, in a way that had nothing to do with the chase. Alfred noticed when he returned, because Bruce was distracted and quiet, and the old butler said, "Something on your mind, Master Bruce," and Bruce said, "I met someone," and Alfred raised an eyebrow and said, "Someone?" Bruce described the encounter, and Alfred said, "Ah." And so the cat burglar finally made her appearance, and we have been tracking her for weeks, and Bruce asked, "You knew about her?" And Alfred said, "Of course. And every high society party that gets robbed, and every jewel that goes missing, and the Whispers call her Catwoman." Bruce said she is good and better than she should be, and Alfred said perhaps she has her own reasons and her own story, and Bruce said she is a criminal, and Alfred said, "And you are a vigilante, and from a certain point of view, you are both outside the law." Bruce wanted to argue, but could not find the words because Alfred was right, and the line between what he did and what she did was thinner than he wanted to admit. He saw her again 2 weeks later, at a gala Bruce Wayne was forced to attend, and she was there as Selina Kyle, and a woman in an emerald dress that matched her eyes, and she was charming, the elderly billionaire whose diamonds she had probably come to steal. Bruce watched her work the room, and she was good at this too, and playing the role of socialite with the same skill she used on rooftops. And when their eyes met across the champagne fountain, she smiled and raised her glass in a toast. He approached and said, "Miss Kyle and I do not believe we have met." And she said, "Mr. Wayne, and of course we have not. And you never notice anyone at these things. And you are usually too busy being drunk or charming or both." Bruce played his part and said, "Guilty as charged. And what brings you to this tedious affair?" And she said the same thing as everyone else, and free champagne and the chance to see how the other half lives. And you. He said, "Family obligation, and my name is on the building." And she laughed and said, "How terrible for you. And to be so rich and so burdened." And they both knew they were playing a game, and both knew the other knew, and neither acknowledged it. They talked for an hour, and it was the most alive Bruce had felt in months, because she was sharp and funny, and saw through his playboy facade, but did not call him on it, and instead played along and made it fun. When she excused herself to powder her nose, Bruce knew she was actually going to rob their host, and he slipped away and changed and was waiting on the roof when she emerged through a window with a sapphire necklace. She saw him and said, "We really must stop meeting like this, and people will talk." And Bruce said, "Return it." And she said, "No, and I rather like it, and it matches my suit." And he said, "I will take it from you." She said, "You can try," and they fought, and it was different from fighting criminals because she was not trying to hurt him, and he was not trying to hurt her, and it was more like dancing than combat. They moved across the rooftops, trading blows and quips, and she said, "You hold back, and I can feel it, and are you afraid you might actually enjoy yourself?" And Bruce said, "I am trying not to hurt you." And she said, "How sweet and how very boring." She got past his guard and kicked him back, and he stumbled, and she laughed and said the great Batman, and beaten by a cat, and how embarrassing, and he swept her legs, and she fell, and he caught her before she hit the ground. They were face to face, and both breathing hard, and she said, "Whoa," and this is interesting, and he said, "Give back the necklace," and she said, "Make me." He should have arrested her, and should have taken her to Gordon, and should have ended this. But instead, he said, "Why do you do this, and why steal when you clearly do not need the money?" Her smile faded, and she said, "Everyone needs something, Batman, and some people need money, and some need power, and some need to feel alive." And she touched his face and said, "What do you need?" Bruce said, "Justice," and she said, "Liar, and you need this, and you need the hunt and the fight and the mission, because without it, you are nothing, and just another broken rich boy with too much time and too much pain." He said, "You do not know me," and she said, "I know you better than you think, and I see you, and not the mask, and not the symbol, and you and the man underneath, who is so desperate to matter that he dresses up and beats people in alleys." Bruce pulled back and said, "You are wrong," and she stood and said, "Am I? And prove it, and take off the mask right now, and show me Bruce Wayne." And he froze because she knew, and she knew his name. She said, "I have known for months, and it was not hard to figure out. And rich boy who disappears for 7 years and comes back the same time Batman appears, and billions of dollars in technology, and a cave under Wayne Manor, and really, you could have tried harder to hide it." Bruce asked, "Why have you not exposed me?" And she said, "Because I like you, and because we are the same, and both of us are orphans, and both of us are broken, and both of us are trying to survive in a city that wants to kill us." Bruce said, "We are nothing alike," and she said, "Keep telling yourself that." And she kissed him, and his mind went blank, and when he came back to himself, she was gone. And so was the necklace, and so was any certainty he had about who he was. He returned to the cave shaken, and Alfred took one look at him and said, "What happened?" And Bruce said, "She knows," and Alfred asked, "Knows what?" And Bruce said, "Everything, and who I am, and what I do." And Alfred said, "And what did she do with this information?" Bruce said nothing, and she just, and he could not finish. And Alfred said, "Ah, and so the cat has claws, and more importantly, has gotten under your skin." And Bruce said, "I need to stop her." And Alfred said, "Or you need to understand her." The encounters continued, and sometimes they fought, and sometimes they talked, and sometimes they just sat on rooftops and watched the city together. And Bruce found himself looking forward to their meetings in a way that terrified him. She told him her story slowly and in pieces. And she had been a prostitute and an orphan raised in the East End, where the only law was survival. And she had learned to steal, to eat, and to fight, to live. And the system had failed her long before she failed it. She said, "I am what Gotham made me, and just like you, and the city broke us both. And we just chose different ways to deal with the pieces. And you chose justice, and I chose freedom, and neither of us is right, and neither of us is wrong." Bruce said, "Theft is wrong," and she said, "Is it? And is it wrong to steal from people who have so much they do not notice? And is it wrong to take what you need to survive? And you were born with everything, and I was born with nothing. And do not lecture me about morality." He said, "I am trying to help people," and she said, "So am I, and every jewel I steal, I sell, and the money goes to the East End, and to women who need it, and to children who are hungry, and I am Robin Hood in a catsuit, and you are just too self-righteous to see it." Bruce checked, and she was telling the truth, and most of her stolen goods were fenced, and the money distributed through anonymous donations to shelters and schools and community programs in the poorest parts of Gotham. He confronted her and said, "Why not just ask me for money, and I would have given it, And she said, because charity is not the same as justice. And because you throwing money at the problem does not fix the system that created it. And because some of us need to feel like we earned what we have. Bruce understood then that she was right and that they were more alike than he wanted to admit. And both of them were products of Gotham, and both of them were trying to save it, and they just had different methods. Their relationship became complicated, and sometimes they were allies, and sometimes they were enemies, and sometimes they were something else entirely, and something that neither of them had words for. She saved his life twice, and once from a sniper he did not see, and once from a bomb he did not know about. And when he asked why, she said, because you are mine to torment, and no one else gets to kill you. He saved her life more times than he could count, and pulled her out of the river when a heist went wrong, and took a bullet meant for her and caught her when she fell. And every time she looked at him like she was trying to figure out a puzzle that had no solution. One night, they sat on the roof of Wayne Tower, and she was pressed against his side and said, you know, this cannot work, and you and me, and we are too different. And Bruce said, I know, and she said, but I wish it could. He said, why do you stay, and why not leave Gotham and start over somewhere else? And she said, for the same reason you stay, and because this city is in our blood, and because leaving would be like cutting out part of our soul. She turned to him and said, take off your mask. And he said, what? And she said, you heard me. And if you trust me, then show me your face. And he hesitated because only Alfred knew. And only Alfred had seen Bruce Wayne and Batman as the same person. But he trusted her, and he did not know why. But he did, and he removed the cowl, and she stared at him and said, Bruce Wayne and I should have known, and of course it is you, and only you, would be crazy enough. He said, and you are Selina Kyle, and she said, guilty as charged. And they sat there with their masks off and their faces exposed, and for the first time in years, Bruce felt like a person instead of a symbol. She traced the scars on his face and said, you have been through so much, and he said, so have you. And she said, we are a pair of broken things and trying to fix a broken city, and it would be funny if it were not so sad. He kissed her then, and it was different from the last time because this time there was no chase and no game, and just two people who understood each other in a way no one else could. They began a relationship that existed in the grey area between law and justice, and between hero and thief. And she still stole, but only from those who deserved it. And he still stopped her, but less often and less seriously. Alfred disapproved, but said nothing because he saw that Selina made Bruce happy and made him remember that he was human and that there was more to life than the mission. Gordon knew something was different but did not ask, because the crime rate continued to drop, and Batman continued to deliver criminals. And if the Bat had a personal life, then that was none of his business. The Joker noticed and used it against them, and kidnapped Selina and left Bruce a choice, and save her or save a building full of civilians. And Bruce chose the civilians because he had to, and because the mission came first. He found her later beaten but alive, and she said, I understand, and you did the right thing. And he said, I am sorry, and she said, I know, and I knew what I was getting into, and I knew you would always choose Gotham over me. She said, that is why I love you, and because you are so stubborn, and so dedicated, and so willing to sacrifice everything for people who will never know your name. And he said, I love you too. And it was the first time he had said those words since his parents died. But love was not enough because she was right, and he would always choose Gotham, and she would always walk the line between right and wrong, and they both knew this could not last. She left one night and left a note that said, I need to find out who I am without you and without this city and without the constant fight. And Bruce found it and understood and let her go. She returned months later and then left again. and this became their pattern, and together and apart and together again. And the cycle continued because neither could fully commit and neither could fully let go. Bruce realized she was his anchor and the one person who saw him completely and accepted both Bruce Wayne and Batman and did not try to change either. And Alfred said, "She is good for you." And Bruce said, "I know, but I do not know if I am good for her." Selina said once that being with Batman was like loving a ghost, and you are never fully there and never fully present, and always thinking about the next crime and the next villain and the next mission, and I am just another distraction. Bruce said, "You are not a distraction, and you are." And he could not finish because she was right, and he could not give her what she needed and what she deserved, and the mission would always come first. But she stayed anyway, and in her way, and on her terms. And they had their nights on rooftops and their stolen moments between patrols and their complicated dance of trust and betrayal and love and duty. She taught him that the world was not black and white, and that justice was not always lawful, and that sometimes the right thing to do was the wrong thing legally, and that morality was more complex than he wanted to believe. He taught her that some lines should not be crossed, and that killing was never the answer, and that there was value in the code even when it was hard, and that doing the right thing mattered even when no one was watching. They made each other better, and they made each other worse, and they were perfect for each other, and completely wrong. And Bruce accepted that this was the price of being Batman, and that normal relationships were impossible, and that love was just another sacrifice on the altar of justice. But on nights when they sat together and watched the sun rise over Gotham, and her head on his shoulder and his arm around her waist, and he allowed himself to imagine a different life and a different choice and a different path. A life where Bruce Wayne had not died in that alley, and where the boy had been allowed to heal instead of transform, and where love was possible, and family was possible, and peace was possible. But that was a fantasy, and Bruce lived in reality. And in reality, there was only the mission, and the city, and the endless night. And Selina understood that, and loved him anyway, and that made her the most dangerous thing in his life. Because she made him want things, and want to be more than the symbol, and want to believe that maybe Bruce Wayne still existed somewhere under the cowl, and that maybe there was a future beyond the mission. And that hope was terrifying because hope meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant weakness, and weakness meant people died, and he could not allow that. So he held her at night and let her go in the morning, and accepted that this was all they could ever have, and all they could ever be, and she did the same, and they both pretended it was enough. Catwoman was the grey area, and the complication and the reminder that the world was not as simple as he wanted it to be, and that he was not as alone as he thought, and that even Batman could love and be loved. And that made her the most important person in his life, after Alfred, and the most dangerous weakness, and the one thing that could make him choose himself over Gotham. But he never did, and she never asked him to. And they both accepted the tragedy of loving someone you could never fully have. This was the grey and the space between law and justice, and between duty and desire, and between Batman and Bruce Wayne. And Selina Kyle lived in that space and thrived in it and made it beautiful, and showed him that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than vengeance and symbols and endless crusades. But not enough to make him stop, and not enough to make him choose differently, and not enough to save either of them from what they had become. And so the dance continued, and the cat and the bat, and the thief and the detective, and the woman who saw him, and the man who could not fully be seen, forever circling, and forever apart, and forever together in the only way they knew how. This was love in Gotham, and complicated, and impossible, and real. And Bruce accepted it, because accepting it was easier than admitting that he was capable of wanting something for himself, and that deep down he was terrified of what would happen if he ever stopped being Batman long enough to find out who Bruce Wayne really was. Selina knew this and loved him anyway, and that was the greatest gift and the cruelest curse, because she showed him what he was missing and what he had sacrificed and what he could never have. And she did it with a smile and a kiss and a stolen jewel. And Bruce let her because she was right and they were the same, and two broken people trying to survive in a city that wanted to destroy them. And if they could find moments of light in all that darkness, then maybe it was worth it. Maybe 10 years passed and Bruce Wayne turned 38, and his body was a map of scars and broken bones that had healed wrong and joints that ached when it rained. And the doctors Alfred secretly consulted said he had the body of a man twice his age. But he did not stop because Gotham still needed him, and the mission was never complete. And every night he went out, and every night he fought, and every night he came back, a little more broken than before. Alfred begged him to rest and to take a break and to let someone else carry the burden for just a little while. But Bruce said, there is no one else, and there is only me, and if I stop, then people die. Dick Grayson had come and gone, and the first Robin who had been a light in the darkness, but who had grown up and become Nightwing and moved to Bloodhaven to be his own hero. And Bruce was proud and also terrified that he had created another version of himself. Jason Todd had come after, and the angry street kid who Bruce tried to save and who died because Bruce was too slow and the Joker too cruel, and that failure haunted him more than his parents' deaths because Jason was his responsibility and his fault. Tim Drake was the current Robin and the brilliant detective who had figured out Batman's identity and demanded to help, and Bruce had resisted but eventually gave in because the mission was too big for one person, even if he pretended otherwise. Barbara Gordon was Oracle now, and the Commissioner's daughter who had been Batgirl until the Joker shot her and paralyzed her and turned her rage and her intelligence into a digital network that supported them all. They were his family now, and the people who kept him human and who reminded him why he fought, and Alfred held them together because Bruce was too broken and too consumed to do it himself. But even with help, the mission was eating him alive, and he was slower now and more tired and more willing to take hits he should have avoided, because part of him wondered if it would be easier to just let one of them land. Selina noticed, and she said, "You are going to get yourself killed." And he said, "Eventually, yes." And she said, "That is not funny." And he said, "I am not joking. And I always knew this would kill me, and I just hope I last long enough to matter." She left again after that and said she could not watch him destroy himself, and he let her go because he understood and because he did not know how to stop. Gordon noticed too and pulled him aside one night and said, "You need to slow down." And Batman said, "Crime does not slow down." And Gordon said, "But you are not a machine, and even you have limits." Batman said, "When I find them, I will let you know," and disappeared into the night, leaving Gordon standing on the rooftop shaking his head. The city had changed and crime was down, but it was a war of attrition, and for every criminal Batman put away, two more appeared, and the system was still broken, and Arkham was still a revolving door, and nothing ever really changed. Bruce began to wonder if he was making any difference at all, and if his entire crusade was just hubris and the desperate action of a traumatized child who never grew up. But he could not stop because stopping meant admitting it was all for nothing, and that his parents died for no reason, and that he had wasted his life chasing shadows. Then Bane came to Gotham, and everything fell apart. The first sign was the breakout at Arkham, and the entire asylum emptied in one night, and every villain Bruce had ever fought suddenly free and flooding the city, and chaos erupted on a scale he had never seen. Bruce threw himself into the crisis and fought for 72 hours straight without sleep and captured villain after villain and returned them to custody while trying to figure out who orchestrated the breakout and why. He did not eat and did not rest and pushed his body beyond its limits because the city was burning and people were dying and there was no time for weakness. Alfred pleaded with him to stop and to take an hour and just an hour to recover. But Bruce refused because one more hour meant one more victim, and he could not allow that. By the third day, he was running on fumes and muscle memory and willpower and nothing else. And his hands shook, and his vision blurred, and his body screamed at him to stop. But he continued and captured the Riddler, and then Scarecrow, and then Two-Face, and one by one, the rogues went back to Arkham, and the crisis seemed to be ending. That was when Bane revealed himself and stepped out of the shadows in Wayne Manor, and Alfred tried to stop him but was beaten aside like a child, and Bane walked through the house like he owned it. Bruce returned home, exhausted and broken, and found Bone waiting in the Batcave, and the man was huge and muscular, and wearing a mask that fed him venom, and a drug that made him superhuman. Bone said, "I know who you are, Bruce Wayne, and I know everything about you, and I orchestrated the breakout to break you down, and to exhaust you, and to make you weak. And now I will break you completely." Bruce fought, but he was already broken, and 3 days without sleep, and dozens of fights and injuries stacked on injuries, and he was not ready and not strong enough. They fought through the cave, and Bruce used every technique and every trick he had learned. But Bane was stronger and faster, and most importantly, fresher, and he had planned this perfectly. Bane said, "You are a legend, Batman, and a myth that criminals fear, but I will show them you are just a man, and just as breakable as anyone else." He grabbed Bruce and lifted him overhead and said, "I was born in darkness and raised in a pit, and I did not see light until I was a man. And you merely adopted the dark, and I was molded by it." And then he brought Bruce down across his knee, and Bruce felt his spine snap, and the worst pain he had ever experienced, and worse than his parents dying, and worse than Jason dying, and worse than anything. He could not move, and could not breathe, and could not do anything but scream. And Bane dropped him and said, "The Batman is broken, and the legend is dead, and Gotham is mine." Bruce lay there paralyzed and helpless, and heard Bane walk away, and heard Alfred crying and calling for help, and felt nothing below his waist, and knew his crusade was over. He woke in Wayne Manor with doctors around him and Alfred's tear-stained face, and the news on the television showing Gotham descending into chaos. The doctors said his back was broken and his spine was fractured, and he would never walk again, and surgery might help but probably not, and physical therapy would take years. And even then, Bruce did not listen, because all he could think was that he had failed, and that Gotham needed him, and that he was useless and broken and finished. Bane took over the city and declared martial law and freed all the criminals and gave them territories, and Gotham became a war zone overnight. The bridges were blown and the city was cut off, and the federal government hesitated because sending in the military might trigger something worse, and Bane had leverage and hostages and nuclear weapons. Bruce watched from his bed helpless and raging and hating himself more than he had ever hated anyone. Alfred said, "You did everything you could," and Bruce said it was not enough. "And I trained my whole life, and I became the greatest fighter in the world, and it meant nothing. And one man broke me like I was made of glass." Dick came and said, "We will fix this, and Nightwing and Robin and Oracle will hold the city until you recover." And Bruce said, "And what if I never recover, and what if this is permanent?" And Dick had no answer. Barbara called and said, "The city is falling apart, and we need you, and we need Batman and Bruce." said Batman is dead and I killed him, and she said no, and you are just hurt, and you will come back, and he wanted to believe her but could not. Selina appeared in his room one night and climbed through the window like always, and sat on his bed and said, "So the bat has been caged," and he said, "Go away," and she said no. She said, "I have been where you are, and broken and helpless, and convinced it was over, and the Joker put me here," and she gestured at the chair she sometimes needed and said, "And I came back, and so will you." Bruce said, "How? And I cannot walk, and I cannot fight, and I am nothing without that." And she slapped him hard enough to snap his head to the side and said, "Stop feeling sorry for yourself." She said, "You are Bruce Wayne, and you are the man who traveled the world and learned from masters and built himself into a legend, and one setback does not erase that, and one man does not define you." Bruce said, "He broke my back," and she said, "So heal it." And he said, "The doctors say I cannot." And she said, "Since when do you listen to doctors? And since when do you accept limitations? And since when do you give up?" He stared at her, and something sparked in his chest, and something that felt like hope or rage, or maybe both. She said, "There is a place and a prison in the worst part of the world, and Bane came from there, and there is a doctor who might be able to help, and legends say people have climbed out of the pit when everyone said it was impossible." Bruce asked, "How do you know this?" And she said, "Because I have been researching him since he broke you, and because I will not let you quit, and because Gotham needs you." Alfred said, "Absolutely not, and you can barely move, and traveling to some foreign prison is suicide." And Bruce said, "Then I die trying, and that is better than dying here." Within a week he was on a plane, and within 2 weeks he was in the pit, and a literal hole in the ground in the middle of a desert where the worst criminals were thrown to rot. The doctor was an old man who had survived here for 40 years, and he looked at Bruce's back and said, "I can fix this, but it will be the most painful thing you have ever experienced, and you might die." Bruce said, "Do it." And the doctor set his spine without anesthesia, and Bruce screamed until he passed out and woke to agony that made the breaking seem gentle. The doctor said, "Now you must heal, and then you must climb." And Bruce said, "Climb what?" And the old man pointed up at the opening far above, and the walls were sheer and smooth and impossible. Bruce said, "No one can climb that." And the old man smiled and said, "Many have tried and all have fallen, except one. And that one was Bane. And if you want to defeat him, you must do what he did and make the climb." Bruce spent months healing and doing physical therapy in a prison pit while Gotham suffered, and he heard news reports on a smuggled radio about the city and the chaos and the death toll, and it made him push harder. The other prisoners watched, and some helped, and some mocked, and they said, "You will fall like all the others, and the climb is impossible," and Bruce said, "I will make it." His body healed slowly, and too slowly, and the doctors had been right that he would never be the same, and his back would always be weak, and his body would always be compromised, but he could move and he could train, and that was enough. He started climbing when he could stand and fell the first time within minutes, and the rope caught him before he hit the bottom, but the failure burned. He climbed again and fell again, and climbed again and fell again, and the cycle continued for months, and each time he got higher, and each time he fell harder. The old man said, "You are afraid, and fear is what makes you fail." And Bane made the climb without the rope, and with nothing but faith. And Bruce said, "Faith in what?" And the old man said, "In himself." Bruce realized the rope was a crutch and a safety net that made him cautious and made him hold back, and to truly succeed, he had to risk everything. He climbed without the rope and fell and died, would have died but landed in water at the bottom and survived with broken ribs and a concussion. He healed and climbed again, and this time made it halfway, and this time when he fell, he caught himself and pulled himself back up and continued. The climb became meditation and became purpose and became the only thing that mattered. And Bruce emptied his mind of everything except the next handhold and the next foothold and the next breath. He thought about his parents and about the vow and about Gotham and about everyone who had ever believed in him and about the symbol he had created and about what it meant to be Batman. Near the top there was a jump and a gap that could not be reached, and that required a leap of faith, and Bane had made it, and so must he. Bruce stood at the edge and looked down and saw the pit below and saw certain death and remembered the old man's words about fear. He thought about fear and about how he had used it his whole life and how he had become it and how he had let it control him as much as he controlled it. He thought about the choice he made in the garden and about becoming what he feared and about whether that had been right or just another form of being broken. And then he jumped, and for a moment he was weightless and free and more alive than he had been in years. His hands caught the ledge, and he pulled himself up and climbed the rest of the way and emerged into sunlight and freedom and rebirth. The prisoners below cheered and the old man smiled, and Bruce stood at the edge of the pit and looked toward Gotham and knew what he had to do. He had been broken and had fallen and had climbed back out of hell itself, and now he would return and he would save his city, and he would show Bane that the Batman could not be killed. Because Batman was more than a man, and more than a body, and more than any physical form, and Batman was an idea, and ideas cannot be broken. The journey back took weeks, and Bruce trained as he traveled and rebuilt his body and his skills, and accepted that he would never be what he was. But that did not mean he was finished. He contacted Alfred and said, "I am coming home." And Alfred wept with relief and said, "Thank God, and we thought you were dead." He contacted Dick and said, "Gather everyone and get ready, and we take back Gotham." And Dick said, "How?" And Bruce said, "Together, and this time I will not fight alone." He arrived in Gotham at night, and the city was dark and occupied, and Bane ruled from City Hall like a king, and the people suffered under his tyranny. But Bruce did not go straight for Bane, because he had learned, and he gathered his allies, and he planned, and he prepared, and he did what Bane had done to him. He weakened Bane's forces and freed territories and inspired the people to rise up and reminded them that they were not victims and that Gotham belonged to them. Selina found him on a rooftop and said, "You came back," and he said, "I promised," and she said, "You're back," and he said, "Still broken, but I have learned to live with it." She said, "You are different," and he said, "I am less," and she said, "No, and you are more because you are not just the mission anymore. And you are not just Batman, and you have remembered that you are also Bruce Wayne." The final confrontation with Bane happened at dawn, and Bruce faced him without fear and without rage and without the desperation that had defined their first fight. Bane said, "You should have stayed in the pit," and Bruce said, "I did not crawl out of the darkness to die in the light." They fought, and Bruce was slower and weaker, and his back screamed with every movement, but he was smarter and calmer and more focused. He used Bone's strength against him and cut off his venom supply, and watched the big man weaken and realize he had been beaten. Bruce said, "You tried to break me and you succeeded, but I rebuilt myself, and you cannot break what has already been broken and made stronger." He defeated Bane and freed Gotham, and the people emerged from their homes and reclaimed their city, and for the first time in months, there was hope. But Bruce did not feel victorious, and he felt tired and old and aware of his mortality in a way he never had been before. He stood in the cave afterward, and Alfred helped him remove the suit and saw the scars and the damage and the body that would never fully heal. Alfred said, "You cannot keep doing this," and Bruce said, "I know." And Alfred said, "So what will you do?" And Bruce said, "I will do it anyway, because what else is there?" But something had changed, and the breaking had taught him that he was not invincible, and that he could not do this forever, and that eventually someone would have to take his place. He looked at Dick and Tim and Barbara, and saw the future, and saw that maybe his greatest legacy would not be the fear he inspired, but the heroes he created. That night, he patrolled Gotham, and his back ached, and his body protested, and every movement was harder than it used to be. But he continued because Gotham needed him, and because the mission was not finished, and because he had made a promise that he would never break. He had fallen, and he had risen, and he had learned that being Batman was not about being unbreakable, but about getting back up every time you were broken. This was the fall and the resurrection, and the understanding that even legends can bleed. And Bruce Wayne had bled and had nearly died, and had climbed out of hell itself to continue his crusade. Because that was what Batman did, and that was who he was, and that was all he knew how to be. The breaking had changed him, but not stopped him, and that made him more dangerous than ever. Because a man who has lost everything and survived has nothing left to fear. And Batman without fear was the most terrifying thing Gotham had ever seen. 15 years after Bane and Bruce Wayne turned 53 and looked 70 and moved like a man made of broken glass and held together with willpower and stubbornness and nothing else. The missions were fewer now, and the patrols were shorter, and more often he coordinated from the cave, while Dick and Tim and Damian and the others did the actual fieldwork. Damian had come as a surprise, and the son he never knew he had, and the product of one night with Talia al Ghul decades ago, and the boy was brilliant and vicious, and everything Bruce feared he might create. But Damian was also capable of love and of growth and of becoming more than his breeding, and Bruce saw in him a chance to do better than he had done with Jason. The Bat family had grown beyond what Bruce ever imagined. And there was Dick in Bloodhaven and Barbara behind her computers, and Tim leading the Teen Titans, and Stephanie and Cassandra and Duke, and a whole generation of heroes who wore the symbol and carried the mission. Bruce coordinated them all and became the general instead of the soldier, and learned to trust them with the city he had once believed only he could save. But it was hard, and letting go was the hardest thing he had ever done. And harder than training, and harder than the breaking, and harder than any physical pain. Because the mission had been his entire life, and his entire identity, and his entire reason for existing. And without it, he did not know who Bruce Wayne was, or if Bruce Wayne even existed anymore. Alfred grew older too, and his hands shook now, and his steps were slower, and his eyes were dimmer. But his loyalty never wavered, and his love never faltered. One night, Alfred said to him that you have done enough, Master Bruce, and you have given everything, and perhaps it is time to rest. And Bruce said, I will rest when I am dead. Alfred said, you are already dying, and doing it slowly and painfully, and watching you destroy yourself has been the greatest sorrow of my life. And Bruce had no answer, because Alfred was right. Selina came and went as always, and their relationship had settled into something comfortable and something less passionate but deeper, and she was the only person besides Alfred who knew all of him. She said, you need to let them carry this, and he said, I am trying, and she said, try harder, because you are not immortal, and the city will survive without you. Bruce said, will it? And she said, yes, because you taught them well, and you built something that will outlast you, and that is your real legacy. He struggled with that, and struggled with the idea that he was not essential, and that Batman could exist without Bruce Wayne, and that maybe he never should have been Batman in the first place. But the city kept turning, and the crime kept coming, and the mission continued, whether he was in the cowl or not. And slowly he began to understand what legacy really meant. It meant building something bigger than yourself, and something that would continue after you were gone, and something that did not depend on any one person. He began training the next generation differently, and not just in combat and not just in detective work, but in the philosophy and the code and the reason behind the mission. He told them about his parents and about the vow he made and about the choices he had made and the mistakes and the regrets and the things he would do differently if he could. Damien listened more than the others and asked questions. The others were afraid to ask and said, "Father, why do we not kill? And it would be easier and more efficient." Bruce said, "Because killing is easy and anyone can do it. And what makes us different is that we choose the hard path and we choose to be better than those we fight." Damien said, "But they do not deserve mercy." And Bruce said, "Mercy is not about what they deserve, and it is about who we are. And the moment we cross that line, we become them." He saw understanding dawn in his son's eyes, and saw the boy he might have been if someone had taught him this when he was 8, instead of trained him to be an assassin. Bruce realized his greatest achievement was not the fear he inspired, or the criminals he caught, but the people he had saved from becoming him. Dick had become Nightwing and found his own path and his own city and his own identity separate from the shadow of the Bat. Tim had become Red Robin and was everything Bruce had hoped to be, and brilliant and balanced and capable of both justice and mercy. Barbara had become Oracle and the heart of the entire operation, and the one who kept them all connected and reminded them they were family. Even Jason had returned and died and been resurrected by Ra's al Ghul and come back wrong and angry and violent, but still fighting for good in his own broken way. Bruce looked at them and saw his legacy, and saw that he had not wasted his life, and that maybe, just maybe, he had made a difference. But his body continued to fail, and the injuries accumulated, and the doctors said his heart was weak, and his lungs were scarred, and his bones were brittle, and he was living on borrowed time. Alfred said, "Please, Master Bruce, and please consider retirement," and Bruce said, "And do what?" And Alfred said, "Live and be Bruce Wayne, and find out who that man is." Bruce tried and attended charity functions and ran Wayne Enterprises and invested in the city and tried to be the billionaire philanthropist everyone thought he was. But it felt hollow and felt like playing pretend and felt like he was wasting time while people suffered, and he always ended up back in the cave watching the monitors. One night Dick found him there at 3 in the morning and said, "You cannot keep doing this." And Bruce said, "I know." And Dick said, "Then stop." And Bruce said, "I do not know how." Dick sat beside him and said, "When I was 8, you saved me, and you took me in, and you gave me purpose, and you made me." Robin and Bruce said, "And I should not have, and I put a child in danger." Dick said, "You gave me a chance to matter, and to turn my pain into something good. And yes, it was dangerous, and yes, I could have died, but I did not, and I became who I am because of you." He said, "Now let me save you, and let us carry this, and you have earned the right to rest." And Bruce said, "I have earned nothing, and I have only done what needed to be done." Dick said, "That is enough, and you have been enough, and you have always been enough." And Bruce felt something break inside and realized he was crying. He had not cried since he was 8 years old, and since that night in the alley, and the tears came and would not stop, and Dick held him while he wept for everything he had lost and everything he had sacrificed. Alfred found them there and joined them, and the 3 of them sat in the cave while Bruce grieved for the boy who had died and the man who had never been allowed to live. In the weeks after, Bruce tried to step back and tried to let the others lead and tried to be just the coordinator and the mentor and the voice in their ears. It was hard, and every instinct screamed at him to suit up and go out and take control, but he forced himself to trust and forced himself to let go. The city continued, and crime continued, and justice continued, and Bruce realized with wonder and pain that they did not need him, and that maybe they never had. He was not sure if that was liberating or devastating or both. Then one night, the monitors showed something that changed everything, and a break-in at Wayne Enterprises, and specifically the research division, and specifically the experimental technology wing. Bruce moved without thinking, and was in the suit, and in the car, and on his way before Alfred could stop him, and his body screamed in protest, but he ignored it. He arrived to find a teenage boy trapped by security, and the boy was wearing makeshift armor and a crude version of the Batman symbol and was trying to steal technology. Bruce grabbed him, and the boy fought and was fast and was skilled and had clearly trained. And Bruce said, "Who are you, and why are you stealing from me?" The boy said, "I need this to stop the Jokers, and my name is Terry McGinnis." And Bruce felt time collapse because he was looking at himself and looking at what he had been at that age, angry and desperate and willing to do anything to make a difference and to fight the evil in the world. Bruce took Terry back to the cave and learned his story and learned that his father had been murdered and that Terry had sworn vengeance and had discovered Batman's identity and decided to take up the mantle. Bruce said no, and absolutely not. And I will not create another child soldier, and I will not repeat my mistakes. And Terry said, "You do not get to decide, and the symbol belongs to Gotham and not to you." Bruce said, "I created it, and I know what it costs, and I will not let you pay that price." And Terry said, "Too late, and I am already paying it, and either you train me or I do this alone and get killed." Bruce saw himself in those words and saw the same stubborn determination and the same refusal to accept no and the same burning need to matter. He looked at Alfred, and the old man said, "It is your choice, Master Bruce, but remember that you cannot save everyone by keeping them away, and sometimes you save them by guiding them." Bruce made a decision and said, "If I train you, then you follow my rules and you follow my code and you never kill." And Terry said, "Agreed." And Bruce said, "And you go to school and you have a life outside this and you do not let it consume you the way it consumed me." Terry agreed and training began. And Bruce saw immediately that the boy had potential and had natural talent and had the anger and the drive and everything needed to be Batman. But Terry also had something Bruce had never had, which was perspective, and which was someone telling him from the start that there was more to life than the mission. Bruce trained him in combat, and in detective work, and in the philosophy, and in the code, and watched him grow, and watched him become something new. Not a copy of Batman, but a version for a new generation, and for a new Gotham. And Terry brought his own style, and his own methods, and his own interpretation of what the symbol meant. Bruce found himself enjoying the mentorship more than he had enjoyed patrolling in years, and found purpose in teaching and in passing on what he had learned. He pushed Terry hard, but not too hard, and demanded excellence, but allowed mistakes and created what he wished someone had created for him. A path to heroism that did not require sacrificing everything, and that did not require dying inside to live outside. Terry took to the streets with Bruce guiding him from the cave, and it was strange to watch someone else wear the cowl and someone else be Batman and someone else carry the symbol, but it was also right, and it was also necessary, and Bruce realized this was how it was meant to be, and that Batman was never supposed to be one man. It was supposed to be a legacy and a symbol that passed from generation to generation, and an idea that could never die because there would always be someone willing to wear the cowl. The years passed, and Terry became a better Batman than Bruce had been, and more balanced, and more human, and more capable of actually living while also fighting. Bruce watched from the cave and coordinated and advised and felt pride he had never allowed himself to feel before. Dick came by one night and said, "You did it, and you actually let go." And Bruce said, "I had to, and I was killing myself and killing the mission by holding on too tight." Dick said, "I am proud of you." And Bruce said, "I am proud of all of you. And you became what I could not, And you found balance and found lives and found happiness while still fighting. Dick said, "We learned from your mistakes," and Bruce said that was the point. And my suffering was not wasted. If it taught you how to avoid it. Alfred grew frailer and spent more time in bed, and Bruce sat with him every day, and they talked about the years and the mission and the family they had built. Alfred said, "I am proud of you, Master Bruce. And not because of Batman, but because you finally learned to let others in, and you finally learned that you do not have to carry everything alone." Bruce said, "You taught me that, and you spent your whole life trying to teach me, and I was just too stubborn to listen." And Alfred smiled and said, "Better late than never." Alfred died quietly in his sleep, and Bruce found him in the morning, and felt a grief deeper than anything, since his parents. The funeral was small, and the family gathered, and they remembered the man who had been father and friend and anchor for all of them. Bruce stood at the grave and said, "Thank you for never giving up on me, and thank you for seeing something worth saving when I could not see it myself, and thank you for being my family." He returned to the cave after and sat in Alfred's chair and realized he was alone now, and truly alone, and the last connection to his past was gone. But he was not alone, because Terry was there, and Dick was there, and the entire family was there, and Alfred's legacy lived on in all of them. Bruce continued mentoring Terry and watching him grow, and watching him become not just a good Batman, but a great one. The Joker was gone now and died years ago in a final confrontation that Bruce barely remembered because his mind had started to fade. The Rogues Gallery had changed, and new villains had risen, and new challenges had emerged, and Terry faced them with courage and skill and heart. Bruce watched and advised and felt satisfied that the mission would continue, and that Gotham would be protected, and that the symbol would endure. One night, many years later, Bruce sat in the cave, and his heart was failing, and his body was shutting down, and he knew his time was ending. Terry found him there and said, "Are you okay?" And Bruce said, "I am fine, and I am just tired." And Terry said, "Then rest, and I have this." Bruce said, "I know you do, and you are ready, and you have always been ready, and I am proud of what you have become." And Terry said, "I only became this because you showed me how." Bruce said, "No, and you became this because you chose to, and because you had the strength to take the pain and turn it into purpose, and that was always in you." He said, "The symbol is yours now, and carry it well. And remember that Batman is not about vengeance, and it is about making sure no one else suffers what we suffered." Terry said, "I will, and I promise," and Bruce nodded and said, "Good," and that is all I needed to hear. He closed his eyes and thought about his parents, and about the vow he made, and about the life he had lived, and about whether it had mattered. He thought about the thousands of lives saved, and the criminals stopped, and the city protected, and the family created, and the legacy built. He thought about Alfred and Selina and Dick and Jason and Tim and Barbara and Damien and Terry and everyone who had been part of this mission. And he knew that it had mattered, and that he had kept his promise, and that no child in Gotham would ever stand alone the way he had stood alone. The monitors showed the city and showed Terry out on patrol and showed the bat signal in the sky and showed that even without Bruce Wayne, the mission continued. Bruce Wayne died that night in the cave, surrounded by the symbols of his crusade and at peace for the first time since he was 8 years old. They found him in the morning, and the news spread quickly, and Bruce Wayne was dead, and the world mourned the billionaire philanthropist who had given so much to Gotham. But they did not know the truth, and they did not know that Bruce Wayne had died decades ago in an alley, and that the man who lived after was just Batman pretending to be human. The funeral was massive, and the city came out to honor him, and they spoke of his charity and his business and his contributions to Gotham. But the real funeral was smaller, and in the cave, and the Bat family gathered around his body in the suit and said goodbye to the man who had created them. Dick said he saved us all, and in his own broken way, he showed us how to be heroes and how to turn pain into purpose. Barbara said he never stopped fighting and never stopped believing that Gotham could be saved, and that belief kept us all going. Tim said he was not perfect, but he was exactly what Gotham needed and what we needed. Demian said Father taught me that strength without mercy is just violence, and that true power comes from restraint. Terry said he gave me purpose and gave me the symbol and gave me the chance to matter, and I will honor that for the rest of my life. They buried him next to his parents and next to Alfred, and the grave was simple and just said, Bruce Wayne and beloved son and friend. But in the cave they built a memorial and a statue of Batman with a plaque that read, he was vengeance, and he was the knight, and he was Batman, and his watch has ended. But the mission continues. Terry wore the cowl that night and went out on patrol, and the city did not know that Bruce Wayne was gone. And the criminals did not know that the original Batman was dead. Because Batman never dies, and the symbol endures. And as long as there is someone willing to wear the cowl and carry the mission, then Gotham will always have its dark night. Years passed, and decades passed, and Terry grew older and trained his own successor, and the cycle continued. The Batman of the future looked different, and used different technology, and faced different threats, but the core remained the same. A person who turned tragedy into purpose, and who stood between the innocent and the darkness, and who refused to let evil win. The symbol spread beyond Gotham and beyond one city, and became something global and something eternal. And somewhere in the collective consciousness of humanity, the idea persisted that when the night is darkest and when hope seems lost, there will always be a shadow that rises. A protector who asks for nothing and expects nothing and simply does what needs to be done because it is right. That was Bruce Wayne's legacy, and not the fear or the violence or the darkness, but the idea that one person can make a difference. That one choice can change everything, and that from tragedy can come hope, and from pain can come purpose. The bat symbol shone in the sky over Gotham and over other cities and over the world, and it meant different things to different people. To criminals, it meant fear, and it meant consequences, and it meant that the shadows were not safe. To victims, it meant hope, and it meant someone was watching, and it meant they were not alone. To heroes, it meant legacy, and it meant duty, and it meant carrying on a mission that would never end. And somewhere in that symbol was the 8-year-old boy who watched his parents die, and who swore that no one else would suffer what he suffered. Somewhere in that symbol was the man who gave everything and sacrificed everything and died alone in a cave because he believed in something bigger than himself. Somewhere in that symbol was the truth that heroes are not born, but made, and not through power or ability, but through choice. The choice to stand when others run, and to fight when others hide, and to believe when others despair. That was Batman, and that was Bruce Wayne, and that was the legacy that would never die. As long as there was darkness, there would be someone to stand against it. And as long as there was evil, there would be someone to fight it. Not because they were special or chosen or destined, but because they chose to be, and that choice echoed through time and through generations and through the endless night. The city slept and the bat watched, and the mission continued. Forever. Because Batman never dies. The symbol endures. The legacy lives. And Gotham rests easy knowing that somewhere in the shadows there is a guardian, a dark knight, a bat, and that bat will watch over the city until the end of time. This was the legacy, and this was the truth, and this was the promise. Bruce Wayne kept his vow, and Batman became eternal, and the boy who died in Crime Alley finally found peace, knowing that his sacrifice mattered, that his pain had purpose, that his life made a difference, and that Gotham would never be alone again. Years turned into decades and decades turned into centuries, and the story of Batman became legend and legend became myth, and myth became something more. Something that existed in the space between truth and fiction and between history and fairy tale and between what was real and what people needed to believe was real. Crime alleys still stood in Gotham, and the buildings were different now, and the streets were cleaner and the lights were brighter, but it was still the same place where it all began, where two shots rang out on a Tuesday night, and where a boy watched his parents die, and where Bruce Wayne ended and Batman began. But something had changed, and the alley was no longer a place of fear, and no longer a place where predators hunted, and no longer a place where people avoided after dark. There was a memorial now, and a simple plaque that marked the spot where Thomas and Martha Wayne fell, and where their son made his vow. People came to pay respects, and left flowers, and left candles, and left notes, thanking the Waynes for their service to the city. Because over time, the truth had emerged, and piece by piece, the story had been revealed, and Gotham learned that Bruce Wayne and Batman were the same person. That the billionaire playboy had secretly been the Dark Knight, and that he had given his entire life to protecting a city that never knew his sacrifice. The reaction was mixed, and some praised him as a hero, and some condemned him as a vigilante, and some simply mourned the tragedy of a life spent in darkness. But everyone agreed that Gotham was different because of him, and that the city was safer, and that the example he set had inspired generations. The Bat family continued, and Terry McGinnis trained his successor, and that successor trained another, and the symbol passed from person to person. Each one brought something new, and each one adapted to their time, and each one carried the core mission forward. The rogues gallery changed, and the Joker became a cautionary tale, and the villains of old were replaced by new threats and new challenges. But the symbol remained, and the bat in the sky remained, and the promise remained that Gotham would always be protected. On quiet nights when the city slept, and the streets were empty, and the rain fell soft, people swore they could still see him. A shadow on a rooftop, and a figure in the darkness, and a presence watching over them. Some said it was Terry or his successor or whoever wore the cowl now, and some said it was just their imagination, and some said it was something else. They said it was Bruce Wayne himself, and still watching, and still patrolling, and still keeping his promise, even from beyond the grave. The scientists and the skeptics dismissed it as superstition, and as the human need to believe in protectors, and as stories people told themselves to feel safe. But the believers knew better, and they knew that some promises transcend death, and some symbols transcend time, and some legends never truly end. In the cave beneath Wayne Manor, now a museum, and now open to the public, the original suit stood in a case of bulletproof glass. People came from around the world to see it, and to stand before the symbol, and to remember the man who wore it. They read the plaques, and learned the history, and understood the sacrifice, and many left in tears because the weight of it was almost too much to bear. One man gave everything so that others could have something, and gave up every chance at happiness, so that children could play safely in parks. The suit was empty now, and the man was gone, and the cave was silent, except for the sound of water dripping and bats rustling overhead. But in that emptiness there was presence, and in that silence there was meaning, and in that stillness there was power. Because Batman was never about the man inside the suit, and was never about Bruce Wayne or Terry McGinnis or any individual person. Batman was the idea that one person could make a difference, and that darkness could be fought, and that evil would never win as long as someone was willing to stand against it. That idea lived on in every person who chose to help instead of hurt, and to protect instead of pray, and to stand instead of run. The bat signal was retired now, and kept in a museum, and no longer shone in the sky every night. But on special occasions and on anniversaries and on nights when the city remembered it was activated and the symbol blazed across the clouds, and every person who saw it felt something and felt safer and felt protected and felt that even though Bruce Wayne was gone, the promise remained. In schools, children learned about Batman and about the history and about the man behind the mask and about what it meant to turn tragedy into purpose. They learned that heroes were not born but made, and that anyone could choose to be better and to do better and to make a difference. Some of those children grew up and put on masks of their own and carried on the tradition and became the heroes their city needed. Others grew up and became doctors and teachers and social workers and police officers and carried on the mission in their own way because Batman had shown them that heroism took many forms and that not everyone needed to fight in the shadows to make the world better. Gotham itself had transformed over the centuries and was no longer the crime-ridden nightmare it had once been. The corruption had been rooted out slowly and painfully, and the systems had been reformed and rebuilt, and the city had healed. Not completely and never completely, because cities carry scars just like people, and Gotham would always bear the marks of its past. But it was better, and it was safer, and it was a place where children could grow up without fear and where families could thrive. And that was Bruce Wayne's true legacy, and not the fear he inspired or the criminals he caught, but the city he saved. On the anniversary of his death, every year, the city held a moment of silence, and in that moment, every person in Gotham stopped what they were doing. They stopped, and they remembered, and they gave thanks for the man who gave everything. The moment ended, and life continued, and the city moved forward, because that was what Bruce would have wanted. He never fought for gratitude, or recognition, or glory, and he fought so that people could live their lives without thinking about him, so that children could sleep safely, and so that parents could walk home without fear, and so that Gotham could simply be a city instead of a battleground. The rain fell on Crime Alley now, as it had fallen that terrible night so many years ago. But this rain was different and was gentler and was cleansing instead of condemning. It washed the streets and nourished the flowers at the memorial and filled the air with the smell of renewal. A young couple walked through the alley hand in hand and laughed about something mundane and beautiful, and were not afraid. An old man sat on a bench nearby and watched them and smiled because he remembered when this place was death, and now it was life. The city breathed and lived and continued, and that breath was steady and strong and full of hope. Somewhere in the darkness of that alley there might have been a shadow, and there might have been a figure, and there might have been a presence watching. Or it might have been nothing, and might have been just the play of light, and might have been just what people wanted to see. But whether real or imagined, the feeling remained that Gotham was protected, and that someone was watching, and that the promise endured. The historians debated whether Batman had been hero or vigilante, and whether his methods were justified, and whether one man should have that much power. But the people of Gotham did not debate, and did not question, and simply knew that he had saved them. And that was enough, and that was everything. Night fell on the city, as it did every night, and the lights came on, and the people went about their lives. Some looked up at the sky and expected to see the signal and felt a pang of nostalgia when they did not. Others looked at the shadows and wondered if he was still out there and chose to believe that he was, because belief was powerful, and belief shaped reality, and belief made the impossible possible. And the belief that Batman still watched over Gotham made the city safer, even if it was just psychological. Even if it was just the idea that someone cared and someone remembered and someone kept the promise. The wind picked up and carried with it the sound of the city and the hum of traffic and the murmur of voices and the distant wail of sirens. Life continued and crime continued and the eternal struggle between good and evil continued. But the balance had shifted and the good was winning more often than not, and the darkness was held at bay. Not by one man and not by one symbol, but by everyone who had been inspired by that man and that symbol. By everyone who chose to be better and to do better and to carry on the mission in their own way. The Bat family still operated and still protected and still fought, but they were not alone anymore. The entire city had become the Bat family and had become protectors of each other and had become the guardians. Batman always hoped they would be. In the end, that was the real victory, and not that Batman saved Gotham, but that Gotham learned to save itself. That the city stopped waiting for a hero and became heroic itself. That the people stopped being victims and became protectors. And that the symbol Bruce Wayne created became bigger than him and bigger than any one person and became the soul of the city itself. The rain continued to fall and the night continued to deepen and the city continued to live. And if you listened carefully and if you believed and if you needed to, you could almost hear it. A voice in the darkness and a whisper in the wind and a promise in the rain. I am vengeance and I am the night. And I am Batman. Not spoken, but felt, and not heard, but known, and not seen, but present. The eternal guardian and the dark knight and the Bat. Forever watching and forever protecting and forever keeping the vow made by a broken boy in a garden long ago. The story ends here, and the legend continues, and the symbol endures. Bruce Wayne died, but Batman lives and will live forever. Because some ideas cannot die, some promises cannot be broken, and some symbols cannot fade. As long as there is darkness, there will be light, and as long as there is fear, there will be courage, and as long as there is evil, there will be someone to stand against it. That someone wears many faces now, and many names, and many forms, but they all carry the same symbol, and the same mission, and the same promise, to protect the innocent and to fight the guilty and to make sure no child ever stands alone in an alley while their world falls apart. This is the complete story of Batman and of Bruce Wayne and of the boy who died and the legend that was born. This is the tale of tragedy transformed and of pain given purpose and of one life that changed millions. This is the myth and the truth and the eternal watch. Sleep now and rest easy and know that Gotham is safe. Know that the Bat watches still and that the promise endures and that the darkness is held at bay. Sleep and dream of heroes and dream of symbols and dream of the idea that one person can make a difference. Sleep and let the rain wash over you and let the night embrace you and let the story carry you. Because the story never truly ends. And the mission never truly stops, and the watch never truly ends. Batman is eternal, and the symbol lives, and the promise remains. Now and forever, and until the end of time. The bat signal may not shine in the sky, but it shines in the hearts of everyone who believes, everyone who hopes, and everyone who fights, and everyone who refuses to give in to fear. That light will never go out. And that hope will never die, and that symbol will never fade. This is the legacy, and this is the truth, and this is the promise. Sleep Gotham, and rest well, and dream peaceful dreams. The Bat watches still, and the night is safe, and the darkness holds no terror. For in the shadows there is a guardian, and in the darkness there is light, and in the eternal night there is eternal vigilance. The story is complete, and the circle is closed, and the promise is kept. Bruce Wayne is at peace, and Alfred is at peace, and all who fought and all who fell are at peace. But their work continues, and their legacy lives, and their symbol endures. Now close your eyes and let the rain lull you, and let the night embrace you. Let the story fade into memory. and let memory fade into dream, and let dream fade into sleep, peaceful and deep and safe. Because Gotham rests knowing it is protected, and you can rest knowing the story is told. The complete mythology of Batman and the legend of the Dark Knight and the eternal watch over Gotham sleep now as the city sleeps, and as the Bat watches, and as the promise endures. Sleep knowing that evil may exist, but good fights back. Sleep knowing that darkness may fall, but light always returns. Sleep knowing that heroes may die, but the symbol never does. The rain falls gentle and soft, and the city breathes slow and steady. And somewhere in the darkness there is still a shadow, still a figure, still a bat, watching over those who sleep and protecting those who dream. Forever and always and eternal, this is Batman, and this was his story, and this is his legacy. Now sleep and rest and dream, for Gotham rests, and the Bat watches still, he always will. The rain continues, and the sound becomes everything, and becomes the heartbeat of the city and the breathing of the night. Soft and steady and eternal, like the promise itself, and like the symbol, and like the watch that never ends. In apartments across Gotham, people sleep in their beds, and children dream peaceful dreams, and parents rest, knowing their families are safe. The fear that once gripped this city has faded, and has been replaced by something else and by something better. Hope mixed with memory, and safety mixed with gratitude, and peace mixed with vigilance. The streets are quiet now, and the criminals who once owned the night have learned to fear it, or have learned to change, or have learned that Gotham will not tolerate them. This transformation took decades and took generations and took countless nights of patrol and countless fights and countless sacrifices. But it happened, and the city healed, and the darkness was pushed back one shadow at a time. The memorials stand throughout Gotham and mark the places where heroes fell, and where battles were won, and where the mission was carried forward. Thomas and Martha Wayne in Crime Alley and their legacy of compassion and healing. Alfred Pennyworth in the Wayne family plot and his legacy of loyalty and love. Bruce Wayne beside them and his legacy of sacrifice and symbol, and scattered throughout the city monuments to all who wore the symbol, and all who carried the mission, and all who gave their lives so others could live theirs in peace. People visit these places and remember and teach their children about heroes, and about sacrifice, and about the choice to stand when others run. The lessons are passed down, and the stories are told, and the symbol is explained, not to glorify violence or to celebrate vengeance, but to honor the idea that one person choosing to be better can inspire millions to do the same. The Batcave Museum closes each night at sunset, and the lights go dim, and the exhibits rest in darkness. The original suit stands in its case, and the cape hangs still, and the cowl stares out with empty eyes. But there is presence there, and there is weight there, and there is meaning that transcends the physical. Visitors often report feeling watched when they stand before the suit, and feeling protected, and feeling that the man who wore it somehow still inhabits it. The guards who work there overnight say they sometimes hear things, and the flutter of wings that might be bats or might be something else. The sound of footsteps when no one is walking, and the feeling of air displacement when no one is moving. They do not speak of this publicly because they do not want to sound foolish or superstitious. But among themselves they acknowledge it, and they accept it, and they are comforted by it. Because if Bruce Wayne still walks these halls, then Gotham is truly safe. The universities study Batman now and offer courses on his methods and his psychology and his impact on criminal justice. Students debate his legacy and analyze his choices and discuss whether one person should have that much power. The answers vary, but the question itself honors the complexity of what he did and what he became and what he sacrificed. Some students go on to become police officers and join the GCPD and carry on Gordon's work. Others become social workers and address the root causes of crime and try to stop the creation of criminals before they start. Others become teachers and doctors and lawyers and activists and carry the mission forward in their own ways. All of them were inspired by the symbol and by the story and by the idea that they too could make a difference. The night deepens and the rain falls harder for a moment, then softens again to a gentle patter. The rhythm is hypnotic and soothing and carries with it the weight of all the nights before and all the nights to come. Somewhere a police officer walks her beat and sees a shadow move and instinctively looks up, expecting to see him. The shadow is just a shadow, and the movement is just the wind. But she smiles anyway, because for a moment she believed, and that belief makes her stand a little straighter and walk a little more confidently and know that she is part of something bigger. Somewhere, a child wakes from a nightmare and cries out, and her father comes and holds her and tells her she is safe. He tells her about the bat and about the symbol and about how Gotham is protected. He tells her that fear is normal, but that fear does not have to win because there are always people fighting against it. She asks if Batman is real, and he says yes, and in the way that matters most, and in the hearts of everyone who believes in protecting others. She falls back asleep, comforted, and her dreams shift from nightmares to adventures, where she too wears a mask and protects people. Her father watches her sleep and thinks about Bruce Wayne and about sacrifice and about whether he would have the courage to give what that man gave. He hopes he never has to find out, but he is grateful that someone did and that the city his daughter will grow up in is safer because of it. The rain continues and the night continues and the city continues its slow, steady breathing. In and out, like a sleeper lost in dreams. The towers of Gotham reach toward the sky, and their lights twinkle like stars reflected in water. Wayne Tower stands tallest among them, and bears the name of the family that gave everything. The company still operates, and still employs thousands, and still invests in the city, and still tries to heal the wounds that run so deep. They build schools and fund hospitals, and create programs for at-risk youth, and do all the things Bruce Wayne believed in, not because they have to, but because they choose to, and because the legacy demands it, and because some debts can never be fully repaid. The boardroom has a portrait of Bruce Wayne, and in it he is not smiling because he rarely smiled in life. But there is something in his eyes, and a determination and a fire and a promise that even death could not extinguish. Employees passing by sometimes stop and look at the portrait and wonder what he was thinking when it was painted. If he knew what he would become, or if he was already lost in the mission, or if somewhere deep inside he was still that 8-year-old boy looking for his parents. The rain on the windows creates patterns and shadows, and sometimes those shadows look like wings spreading wide. Sometimes they look like a figure standing watch, and sometimes they look like a guardian keeping vigil. Or sometimes they are just shadows and just rain and just the play of light in darkness. But the employees like to believe otherwise, and like to think he is still watching over the company and the city and the people he died protecting. The Gotham City Police Department headquarters has a shrine to Batman and a display case with items from various cases and a wall of photos. Officers, young and old, stop by it during their shifts and take a moment to remember and to center themselves and to remember why they do this work. The job is hard, and the city still has crime, and there are still bad days and still losses and still reasons to despair. But the shrine reminds them that one man never gave up and never stopped fighting and never let the darkness win. And if he could do it, then so can they. And if he could make a difference, then so can they. The current commissioner is a woman who grew up hearing stories about Batman and who joined the force because of him. She keeps a small bat symbol on her desk and touches it sometimes when making difficult decisions. It reminds her to choose the harder right over the easier wrong and to stand firm in the face of corruption and to never compromise on justice. She has never seen Batman herself because he was gone before she joined, but she feels his presence in the building and in the culture and in the dedication of her officers. And she honors that presence by trying to be worthy of it and by leading with integrity and by never forgetting why they wear the badge. The rain slows and becomes a mist, and the mist hangs in the air like breath in cold weather. The streetlights create halos in the moisture, and the city becomes soft around the edges and dreamlike. A taxi drives through empty streets, taking a nurse home from her shift at Gotham General. She is tired and ready for sleep and thinks about the patients she helped and the lives she touched. She passes Crime Alley and looks at the memorial and says a quiet thank you to the Waynes for their legacy. Without them, there would be no hospital, and without the hospital, she would not have this job, and without this job, she could not help people. Everything connects, and everything traces back, and everything is part of the web that Bruce Wayne wove across this city. The taxi driver is quiet and drives carefully and gets her home safely and refuses the tip she offers. He says his daughter wants to be a nurse, and he is grateful for people like her who help others. She smiles and goes inside and falls into bed and sleeps deeply and dreams of nothing because her sleep is peaceful and untroubled. This is the gift Batman gave, and not dramatic rescues or legendary battles, but quiet safety and peaceful sleep, and the knowledge that tomorrow will come. The city sleeps and dreams, and in those dreams there are shadows that protect and symbols that endure and promises that are kept. And if in those dreams the people of Gotham see a figure on a rooftop or hear the flutter of a cape or feel the presence of a guardian, then so be it. Because dreams and reality blend in Gotham and the line between them is thin and the legend is as real as it needs to be. The rain has almost stopped now, and just a few drops fall, and they sound like tears on the stone, and like whispers in the dark. The night is at its deepest and darkest and most quiet, and the city is at rest. In the cave beneath Wayne Manor, where the museum has closed for the night, there is stillness and silence and shadow. The bats that live in the upper reaches are quiet and roosting, and the only sound is water and wind and the settling of ancient stone. The suit stands in its case, and if anyone were there to see it, they might notice that it seems to stand a little straighter, that the cape seems to hang with more purpose, and that the empty cowl seems to look out with awareness. But no one is there to see, and so the moment exists only for itself, and for the darkness, and for the eternal watch. Somewhere far above the city, the moon breaks through the clouds and casts silver light across Gotham. The rain has stopped, and the sky is clearing, and the stars are beginning to emerge. The city sparkles with moisture and with light and with the beauty that only appears after storms. And in that beauty there is hope and there is renewal and there is the promise of dawn. But dawn is still hours away, and the night still holds, and the darkness still covers Gotham like a blanket. And under that blanket, the city sleeps safe and sound and protected. Protected by police and by citizens and by heroes, both known and unknown. Protected by the systems that were built and the reforms that were made and the choices that were taken. Protected by the legacy of one man who decided that his pain would have purpose and that his tragedy would not be meaningless. Protected by the symbol that endures and the promise that remains and the watch that never ends. Sleep now, Gotham, and rest well, and let the night embrace you without fear. For you have earned this peace, and you have earned this rest, and you have earned this safety. Sleep and dream of tomorrow, and dream of hope, and dream of the city you are becoming. A city that no longer needs a lone guardian in the darkness, because you have all become guardians. A city that no longer waits for a savior, because you have learned to save yourselves. A city that honors its past, and its pain and its heroes by choosing to be better every day. This is what Batman fought for, and this is what he died for, and this is what he achieved. Not through fear alone, and not through violence alone, but through inspiration and example and unwavering dedication. The legend fades into myth, and myth fades into dream, and dream fades into sleep. Deep and restful and healing sleep, where the body recovers and the mind sorts truth from fiction and the soul finds peace. Sleep as the rain has stopped, and as the wind has calmed, and as the city rests. Sleep as the Batman rests, and as the mission rests, and as even legends must rest. Sleep knowing that the watch continues, and that the promise endures, and that Gotham is safe, forever and always and eternal. The Dark Knight has finished his patrol, and the legend has completed its arc, and the story has reached its end. But the symbol remains, and the hope remains, and the choice remains for each new generation to carry forward. To stand when others sit, and to fight when others flee, and to believe when others despair. This is the way, and this is the path, and this is the legacy. Now let it all fade, and let the darkness become comfortable, and let sleep take you gently. The story is told, and the mission is complete, and all that remains is rest. Peaceful and deep and eternal rest. The city sleeps, and you sleep with it. And in that sleep there is safety and comfort, and the knowledge that you are protected. Not by one man, but by the idea he created, and the symbol he forged, and the legacy he left. An idea that says anyone can be a hero, and anyone can make a difference, and anyone can choose to be more than they are. That idea lives on, and will never die, as long as there are people who believe. So believe, and rest, and sleep. Sleep as Gotham sleeps, and dream as Gotham dreams. Dream of shadows that protect, and symbols that endure, and promises kept. Dream of the bat watching over the city and over you, and keeping you safe through the long night. Dream until morning comes and brings with it new light and new hope and new chances. But that is for tomorrow, and tonight is for rest. Tonight is for sleep. Tonight is for peace. The eternal watch continues, but you need not watch tonight. Others watch for you, and the city watches for you, and the bat watches for you. So close your eyes and let go and drift into the darkness that is no longer frightening but comforting. The darkness that holds you and keeps you and promises that dawn will come. Sleep now and rest now, and let all thought fade away. Let the story fade, and let the legend fade, and let even Batman fade into the peaceful nothing of deep sleep. There is only the rain that has stopped, and the night that holds, and the peace that remains. Only sleep and rest, and the gentle fading of consciousness into dreams. Only safety and comfort, and the promise kept. The bat watches still, but you need not watch with him. Sleep, rest, peace. The city sleeps, and the legend sleeps, and now you sleep too. Gotham rests, and the Dark Knight rests, and all the world rests. In peace, and in safety, and in the knowledge that the mission is complete, and the promise is kept. Sleep, and let the darkness take you gently, for the bat watches still. He always will. Now sleep, sleep, sleep. The rain has become memory, and the memory has become silence, and the silence has become everything. Just the soft sound of breathing, and the gentle rhythm of a city at rest, and the quiet hum of night itself. No more stories, and no more legends, and no more words that demand attention. Only the gentle fade of consciousness and the slow drift into the place where dreams live and where sleep waits with open arms. The darkness is complete now, and it is warm and it is safe and it holds you like a blanket woven from shadows and starlight. There is nothing to fear in this darkness and nothing to fight and nothing to prove. Only rest and only peace and only the slow unwinding of thought into stillness. Somewhere far away, Gotham breathes in and out, and in and out. The rhythm is steady and ancient and inevitable, like waves upon a shore. Each breath carries away tension, and each exhale releases worry, and each moment brings you deeper into calm. The buildings stand silent, and the streets lie empty, and the sky spreads vast and dark above. Stars emerge one by one, and they are distant and cold and beautiful. They have watched over this city for eons, and they will watch for eons more. They do not judge, and they do not demand, and they simply shine their ancient light and bear witness to all things. You are safe beneath their gaze, and you are protected, and you are free to let go completely. Let go of thought, and let go of worry, and let go of the need to be anywhere, but here in this moment, suspended between waking and sleeping. The edge grows softer, and the distinction fades, and soon there will be no difference between consciousness and dream. Only the gentle drift, and only the peaceful fade, and only the welcome embrace of deep and healing sleep. In the cave, the bats have settled, and their wings are folded, and their breathing is slow, and they hang in perfect stillness. They dream their bat dreams of flight and shadow, and the endless night that is their home. They know nothing of legends or symbols or promises. They know only the darkness that sustains them, and the sleep that restores them, and the certainty that they are exactly where they belong. You two are exactly where you belong, and you two can rest now, and you two can trust the darkness to hold you safe. Nothing is required of you, and nothing is demanded, and nothing calls you to action. There is only this moment, and this breath, and this slow, gentle sinking into peace. The city sleeps around you, and the world sleeps with it, and even time itself seems to slow and stretch and become meaningless. Past and future dissolve, and only now remains, and now is soft, and now is gentle, and now is safe. Your body grows heavy and warm, and each muscle releases its tension, and each joint softens, and each breath comes easier than the last. The weight of the day falls away, and the weight of worry falls away, and the weight of everything falls away. Until you are light, and you are floating, and you are drifting on currents of sleep that carry you deeper and deeper into rest. There is no need to fight this, and no need to resist, and no need to hold on to waking. Let it go and let yourself fall, and trust that sleep will catch you and hold you and give you what you need. The night stretches endlessly, and there is time, and there is space, and there is nothing but the gentle journey into dreams. Far above in the sky, clouds drift slowly, and they are silver and dark, and they move without effort or intention. They simply follow the wind and trust the air and exist moment by moment without questioning their purpose. You can be like the clouds, and you can drift, and you can trust, and you can exist without effort. Let the wind of sleep carry you, and let the air of darkness hold you, and let the sky of night embrace you. There is a rhythm to the universe, and it is slow and deep and eternal. The turning of planets and the spinning of stars and the endless dance of gravity and light. You are part of that rhythm, and you are held by it, and you can surrender to it completely. Your heartbeat slows to match the rhythm, and your breathing deepens to match the rhythm, and your thoughts fade to match the rhythm, until there is only the rhythm itself, and you are the rhythm, and the rhythm is peace. In the deepest part of the cave where no light reaches there is absolute darkness. Not the darkness of fear, but the darkness of the womb and of the earth and of the space between stars. This darkness is ancient and primal, and it is the source of all rest and all renewal and all healing. It asks nothing, and it judges nothing, and it simply exists as the foundation upon which all light depends. You can rest in this darkness, and you can trust this darkness, and you can let this darkness hold you as completely as the earth holds sleeping seeds. Safe and protected and waiting for nothing, because there is nothing to wait for and nowhere to go and no one to be. Just this darkness and this peace and this eternal moment of rest. The sound of your breathing becomes the only sound, and it is rhythmic and steady and soothing, in and out like waves, and in and out like tides, and in and out like the breathing of the earth itself. Each breath takes you deeper, and each exhale releases more, and each moment brings you closer to complete surrender. To the place where sleep lives, and where dreams wait, and where the conscious mind finally stops its endless chatter. That place is close now, and it is warm, and it is welcoming. The threshold between here and there grows thin, and soon there will be no threshold at all. Only the seamless transition from waking to sleeping, and from thinking to dreaming, and from effort to effortlessness. Let it happen, and let it come, and let yourself cross over without resistance or fear. On the other side, there is only peace and only rest and only the gentle embrace of deep and dreamless sleep. The kind of sleep that heals and that restores and that asks nothing in return. The kind of sleep that is a gift and a blessing and a natural right of all living things. You have earned this sleep, and you deserve this sleep, and you can take it now without guilt or hesitation. Everything can wait, and everything will wait, and nothing is more important than this rest. So let go and let fall and let sleep take you completely down and down and down into the soft and gentle darkness. Down past thought and down past memory and down past even dreams. Into the deep place where there is only being and only peace and only the eternal now. The city sleeps and you sleep with it. The world sleeps and you sleep with it. The universe sleeps and you sleep with it. All is rest and all is peace and all is well. The bat watches, but even the bat is still now, and even the bat is quiet now. His watch is eternal, but his presence is gentle, and it does not disturb your rest. He is a shadow among shadows, and a dream among dreams, and a promise that fades into the background, leaving only peace, and only silence, and only sleep. Deep and dreamless, and healing sleep. The kind that erases the day and prepares for tomorrow and exists only for itself. Sleep without agenda, and sleep without purpose, and sleep that is its own reward. You have arrived at this place, and you are welcome here, and you can stay as long as you need. There is no clock, and no deadline, and no rush. Only the endless moment of now, and the gentle embrace of darkness, and the soft certainty of rest. Let everything fade, and let everything go, and let everything become nothing. Until there is only sleep, only peace, only darkness, only rest. The story is complete, and the telling is finished, and all that remains is the silence after the comfortable silence that requires nothing and offers everything. The silence of deep night and deeper sleep. Rest now and sleep now, and let all things fade into the gentle nothing, into the warm darkness, into the peaceful void, into sleep. Complete and total and healing sleep. The city rests, the legend rests, you rest, all rests, all sleeps, all is peace, now and forever. In the eternal night, where the bat watches, and all is well, sleep, peace, rest,